Chapter 592, Slaying Immortals Wouldn't Be Difficult. Meng Hao closed his eyes again as he floated there. Coldness poured into him, burrowing inside, fusing with his qi and blood, circulating through him. He could sense his fleshly body growing stronger. There seemed to be something strange in these waters, some heavenly power that could use gentleness to cause the fleshly body to be remolded. There was no pain, but the coldness from the cold currents gradually caused Meng Hao's body to grow stiff. After 15 or 20 hours, even his soul was showing signs of growing hard. It was at that point that Meng Hao, floating there in the middle section of the pond, suddenly opened his eyes. Without hesitation he shot up, bursting out from the surface of the water to appear outside. His body quivered, and white mist floated up off of him. Cracking sounds could be heard from the ground beneath his feet as ice began to stretch out in all directions, with him at the center. He sat down cross-legged to meditate. A few days passed before he opened his eyes. Within them could be seen a bluish glow, which came from the poisonous coldness inside him that he still hadn't dispelled. This place is excellent for tempering the fleshly body. However, it also contains a poisonous coldness, which takes time to dispel from within. If I don't dispel it, it would eventually cause grave danger to my life. Frowning, he sighed and then looked at his bag of holding. It's too bad this is an illusory world, so consuming the medicinal pills from here doesn't do any good. The only thing of value are the places here for training and cultivating the fleshly body. If I was able to consume the medicinal pills here, well, considering the Tao of alchemy in this age, my results would be exponentially better. After a few more moments of thought, he rose to his feet and left. He planned to return to the fourth peak to rest and wait for the poisonous cold to be completely expelled. Then he would return again to immerse himself in the cistern waters. As he passed back through the mists, Meng Hao was filled with a feeling like that when you can see a great treasure right in front of you but have no way to take it. He was a bit depressed. Gradually, he left the hazy area. As he passed the two statues and the door of swords, he suddenly stopped in place. A brilliant glow could now be seen in his eyes. His eyes sparkled, and his mind raced as a new idea suddenly began to form. The medicinal pills here are illusory and therefore useless to me. However, there is an endless supply of medicinal plants, even types that are extinct in my time but are common here. In that case, what if I concoct my own pills? He began to pant with eagerness. Illusory medicinal plants can be used to create real medicinal pills. In fact, I've done that before. He took a deep breath, and his eyes seemed to shine as brightly as if they contained suns. His heart trembled from the shock of this new idea. The more he thought about it, the more it seemed like he could do it. If he did, Meng Hao wasn't sure if he could actually influence the fundamental structure of this ancient, illusory world. Back in the Violet Fate sect, I made something from nothing. During my Violet Furnace Lord promotion, I used an illusory item to concoct a medicinal pill made from nothing. 1. He created a pill from nothing starting in around chapter 286. I wonder if I can use a similar method here to concoct a similar pill made from nothing that conforms to the nature of this place. Meng Hao's fists clenched and his body trembled. This idea seemed almost like lunacy, and he wasn't sure if he could succeed. Speaking purely in terms of the Tao of alchemy, though, it was possible. It is difficult to create something from nothing even just once, and even with my skill in the Tao of alchemy, a lot depends on destiny and luck. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they shone with determination. His body flickered as he shot toward the fourth peak. As he sped along, those who caught sight of him felt jealously pricking at their hearts. Because of what had happened at the Demon Immortal Pagoda, Meng Hao's reputation as a Demon Immortal sect Silkprince had grown even beyond what it was before. After returning to the fourth peak, he found that Su Qing was still sitting there meditating. Compared to Meng Hao, Su Qing possessed a level of diligence that he could never attempt to overtake. However, every person's destiny and fortune is different. Techniques that suited Su Qing might not necessarily suit Meng Hao. The opposite was also true. Several days later, all of the disciples in the fourth peak knew that their young lord had apparently gone crazy. He unexpectedly had begun concocting pills, which caused a huge stir on the fourth peak. Eventually, word spread to the other peaks, and soon everyone knew about it. It didn't take long for all sorts of thoughtless gossip to begin to spread. Of course, no one dared to say anything openly. After all, the Silkprince members of the Demon Entente were all very supportive of the matter. When Meng Hao mentioned his desire for mass quantities of medicinal plants, the Demon Entente sprang into action. Once the huge amounts of medicinal plants began to roll in, Meng Hao's entire life consisted of four things: Taoist magic enlightenment, medicinal pill concocting, body tempering in the demon immortal cistern, and dispelling the poisonous coldness. When it came to concocting medicinal pills, he used the Fourth Peak's pill concocting workshop, which belonged to Qi Yunhai. Once Meng Hao took it over, the entire Fourth Peak began to fill with the sound of exploding medicinal pills. The sounds might echo out in the dark of night or in the middle of day. Whenever they were heard, everyone knew that the young lord had once again failed to concoct a batch of medicinal pills. Meng Hao was a bit ashen-faced. This was not the outcome he had hoped for. His Tao of alchemy came from a time tens of thousands of years in the future. The current Tao of alchemy was different, and he needed time to adjust before he could unleash his full potential. Worst of all, Meng Hao found that so far, he could only concoct illusory pills, and was unable to truly create something from nothing. Perhaps it was because of the illusory nature of the world he was in. It almost seemed as if there was some force interfering with him, making it so that the medicinal pills here were eternally categorized in a different way. Unfortunately, Meng Hao's concoctions were outside of that scope, and were thus not permitted to appear. However, he didn't allow himself to become dejected, nor did he give up. He continued to experiment, trying to find that same feeling he had experienced back in the Violet Fate sect. Time went by, and soon an entire month had passed. By the end of that month, there wasn't a single person in the 7 peaks of the Demon Immortal sect that didn't know Meng Hao was concocting pills. The rumblings coming from the 4th peak became just another one of the sounds of the first heaven of the Demon Immortal sect. Considering how many countless times he had failed, and the unthinkable amount of medicinal plants he had wasted, it was good that the Demon Immortal sect had such vast resources. Such wastage would cause even most mid-sized sects to groan in complaint. That was especially so considering that he was using medicinal plants which were considered precious even in this age. Every failure of his caused other disciples to secretly feel stabs of pain in their hearts. Although he hadn't succeeded yet, Meng Hao had actually gained quite a bit. His Tao of alchemy was gradually assimilating into ancient times. Slowly, a new path appeared in the Tao of alchemy that consisted solely of Meng Hao. Furthermore, he had attempted so many concoctions that his proficiency with the process actually vastly improved. Also during that month, he gained complete enlightenment of the first level of the mountain-consuming incantation. It was firmly branded in his mind, and could be taken away when he left the second plane. As for the poisonous coldness within him, it was now more than half expelled from his body. If it weren't for his continued immersions within the cistern, it would have long since completely vanished. Actually, his control over the poisonous coldness had reached the point that as long as he didn't have contact with the cistern water, it would naturally dissipate. During the month, Meng Hao's fleshly body experienced incredible changes. Even he was shocked by the outcome. The bizarreness of the demon immortal cistern was thoroughly shocking. Right now, even when in the first anima, his fleshly body had the power of the 5th anima. According to his estimation, if he could reach a level of fleshly body strength equal to the 7th anima while in the first anima, then when he actually entered the 7th anima, his fleshly body would truly be that of spirit severing. If he encountered Patriarch Huyan in such a state, Meng Hao was confident that the battle would not be as difficult as before, and he would be able to destroy the man in soul and body. Unfortunately, to reach the level of the 6th anima with my fleshly body would involve sinking down to the very bottom of the cistern, after which I would need a month to recover from the poisonous coldness. Furthermore, if my calculations are correct, I would need to go through that process at least 10 times. Essentially, that's almost a year of time. Meng Hao continued to think about the matter as he walked through the various districts of the Demon Immortal sect. As he was walking, he suddenly stopped in place. In that instant, ghost images sprang up from everything around him, the sky, the land, and the world. It lasted only for the space of a few breaths, and then everything went back to normal. That's the 3rd time this month, Meng Hao thought with a frown. He could sense that the second plane was reaching the point of dissipation. When it vanished, all of the people from South Heaven would leave, and their journey into the Demon Immortal sect would reach its conclusion. If it comes quickly, it will be within days. At the slowest, it might last 2 more months. Meng Hao felt a bit of regret. There simply wasn't enough time for him to reach the incredible strength of the 6th anima. His body flickered, and he reappeared on the outskirts of the Demon Immortal sect. It was a relatively remote location, deserted and quiet, a place where few people ever came. He looked down at the ground, then glanced around the area again. Finally, he slapped his bag of holding to produce a wooden time sword. This particular sword was branded with multiple seals that he had used in recent days to reinforce it. He looked at the sword and then the ground. A gleam of decisiveness filled his eyes. If I don't give it a shot, then I'll always regret it. Although I'm 80 to 90% sure it won't work, there's always that slight possibility. With that, he waved his right hand, causing the wooden time sword to stab down into the ground. In the blink of an eye, it was buried deep down. Of all the magical items I possess, only the wooden time swords need to be immersed within the power of time. Even the slight chance of success would mean, when I return to reality, I might be able to have a sword with tens of thousands of years of time. With the power of such a sword, a single slash could cut away tens of thousands of years. Even slaying immortals wouldn't be difficult. A treasure like that is worth a bit of a gamble. Chapter 593, Meeting South Heaven. Meng Hao's eyes flickered. He turned and made his way off into the distance. In the end, he picked 3 other similar places in the demon immortal sect where he concealed wooden time swords in the ground. Currently, he had a total of 10 wooden time swords, which he could use to unleash the first form of the Lotus Sword formation. To bet 4 of the swords on a possibility that was most likely impossible was a huge gamble for him. Each one of these wooden time swords represents a vast collection of spirit stones, he thought. Enduring the pain of it, he hid one sword after another. Every time he did, he buried his dreams and hopes along with it. Meng Hao selected the 4 locations very carefully. In fact, the 4 different locations were places that, according to his memories of the first plane, were still relatively intact. That way, just in case the swords really did appear in the 3rd plane, then they would be easy for him to recover. As night fell, Meng Hao hovered in midair, looking out across the lands. He glanced at the 4 places where he had buried the swords, and the anticipation in his eyes grew stronger. If I succeed, then my path of cultivation can continue even more smoothly. If I don't succeed, then at least I will have no regrets. He made one more final look to ensure that he had committed the various locations to memory. Then he made his way to the 4th peak. More time passed by. Another half-month was gone. The ghost images continued to occur with increasing frequency. The interval between the occurrences was shorter, and every time they occurred, they lasted for several breaths of time. In fact, on one occasion a few days ago, Meng Hao had been concocting pills when the ghost images sprang for a few dozen breaths of time. During that time, he almost had the feeling that he had left the illusory ancient world. He hadn't seen Qi Yunhai recently. Even when he went to pay his respects and wish Qi Yunhai good health, it was only through the closed door of the Immortal's cave. When Qi Yunhai spoke to him from inside, his voice seemed somewhat tired. He wasn't sure what Qi Yunhai was doing, but whenever he heard the man's voice, he felt calmer. Qi Yunhai was his father in this life, and as far as Meng Hao was concerned, the most valuable thing he had acquired in this illusory world. Su Qing still had not finished with her secluded meditation. However, she had clearly experienced success in her enlightenment. Every time Meng Hao looked at her, she was experiencing different transformations of the soul. She seemed completely immersed in Taoist magic. Although she was not consummately beautiful, there was now a vague air to her that was both unforgettable and fascinating. It should be any moment now, murmured Meng Hao as he sat there cross-legged in the Immortal's cave. The ghost images are growing more intense and more frequent. Everybody must be getting very antsy by now. He looked out at the evening sky and the dark clouds that were gathering up above. Recently, he had not of his own initiative sought out any of the other South Heaven cultivators. He had kept to himself, trying to concoct his medicinal pill from nothing, or achieve enlightenment of the Taoist magics. Of course, all of the cultivators from South Heaven were extraordinary individuals. Each one had inside information from their various sects or clans, as well as methods to evade Meng Hao. He was well aware of that. He could either mobilize the entire sect to try to find them, or just not look for them at all. He preferred the latter. Meng Hao was confident that they would come looking for him. When they did, it would be the whole group, except perhaps for Patriarch Huyan, who Meng Hao would kill at first sight. Sheets of rain began to descend onto the demon immortal sect. The entire world turned hazy, and as Meng Hao looked out at it, he had a strange feeling. He wasn't sure if the world he was in was hazy, or if the rain was hazy, or if it was both. It was much like how he viewed the future. The rain fell until the 3rd night watch before it started to lighten up. The land was covered with coldness that transformed into fog. When the sun rose, the fog slowly began to grow thin and then dissipate, transforming the haziness into clarity. Everything looked like a beautiful oil painting. At dawn, a sword came. It was impossible to say where the sword came from, but it shot directly toward Meng Hao. None of the protective spell formations on the fourth mountain did anything to stop it. Apparently, there was something special about this sword. The sword came to stop a meter or two in front of Meng Hao, where it hovered in the air. A mottled glow emanated up from its surface. Just barely discernible on the sword were the traces of a mark made by a soul. It was one character. Fang. Meng Hao smiled. The people he had been waiting for were finally showing their faces. He made a grasping motion with his right hand, causing the sword to fall into his hand. He sent out his divine sense to sweep it over, and immediately a message transmitted into his mind. After hearing the message, his smile grew even wider. After a long moment, he closed his eyes. Noon passed, and evening was approaching by the time he opened his eyes again. His body flickered, transforming into a beam of light that shot past the first peak and out of the mountainous region, toward an area near the main part of the sect where the outer sect disciples resided. When Meng Hao finally arrived, no one was out and about. Everything was quiet as he headed toward a set of 3 connected residence buildings. As he neared a location between the second and third residence buildings, he waved his hand, causing a door to open up. Without hesitation, he entered. Instantly, dozens of gazes fell upon him. The residence was large and filled with dozens of waiting people. As Meng Hao looked around, he could see that they were separated into various groups. Even within those groups, there were various subdivisions based on whichever area the people were from. After all, even though some of them might wish to kill others, they knew that they had to look at the bigger picture and the trouble that it would cause if something like that happened. The largest group of all, shockingly, was the Jai clan. They had 7 people, all of whom were inner sect disciples. Their eyes shone brightly, and although they didn't speak, they made no effort to conceal their extraordinary demeanors, nor their arrogance and pride. Of the group of 7, 3 were women and 4 were men. There were 2 among them who were the most conspicuous. One was Jai Xianxia, the other was a young man who had the glittering mark of a trident on his forehead. He emanated a sense of danger, and reminded Meng Hao a lot of the Jai clan member he had killed most recently, Jai Mingfeng. This young man was none other than Jai clan array member, Jai Mingkong. However, of the 7 Jai clan members, the one that drew Meng Hao's attention the most was neither Jai Xianxia nor Jai Mingkong. Instead, it was an ordinary-looking youth of short stature who stood behind them, smiling. The youth seemed ordinary, but after looking at the 7 Jai clan members, that youth was the only one who caused him to feel a sense of danger. It was merely a sense of danger, though. Meng Hao could not detect any bone-deep hatred from any of them, the type that said they wouldn't rest until he was dead. Apparently, they did not have any idea at all that Meng Hao was connected to the death of Jai Mingfeng. He glanced at Jai Xianxia. She looked back at him silently. In addition to the 7 members of the Jai clan, there was also the Fang clan. Fang Yu looked at Meng Hao with a slight, enigmatic smile. Behind her were 2 men whose eyes glistened with displeasure as they coldly measured up Meng Hao. Meng Hao recalled what Fang Yu had told him about 3 members of the Fang clan coming to the demon immortal sect. Obviously, these were the other 2 from the Fang clan. What was most intriguing to Meng Hao was that, although the right hands of these 2 men seemed ordinary, he could tell that they were not. He was familiar with the usage of the diaphanous Fang clan glove. A single glance, and he could tell that they were wearing just such gloves. In addition to the Jai and Fang clans, there were 4 or 5 others from the eastern lands. Most of them were grouped near the Jai or Fang clans, but were eclipsed by those blazing suns of that part of the world. They didn't look very extraordinary at all in comparison. However, their cultivation bases were clearly beyond ordinary. As Meng Hao looked them over, his gaze came to rest on a tall, slender man who stood next to Fang Yu. He was smiling, but within the gentleness of his look was a viciousness buried deep down. Inside, he was obviously an ambitious and ruthless person. As for who he was, Meng Hao wasn't quite sure. However, considering where he was standing, he could formulate some guesses. Don't tell me this guy is chasing after the explosive dragon, he thought. He suddenly felt a bit of admiration for the man's bravery. In another direction were the people from the northern reaches. From what Meng Hao understood, the northern reaches was a savage and uncivilized region. In some ways, it might be better than the western desert, but it was vastly different from the southern domain or eastern lands. Actually, Meng Hao knew that the so-called northern reaches were actually a land of exile. The cultivators there were mostly people that other locations couldn't tolerate, who eventually sought their fortune in the northern reaches. Of course, what the northern reaches proclaimed to have was freedom, complete and ultimate freedom. Most of the sects there were rebel sects from other areas. The clans were usually formed from scattered remnants of other clans. One example was the so-called imperial bloodline clan. According to rumor, that clan had previously given rise to several immortals. Because of that, descendants had a strong foundation and were able to expand and grow. Eventually, the group split. One half perished and the other half traveled to the northern reaches where they became this new clan. There were a total of 8 cultivators from the northern reaches. All of them looked very bizarre, and none of them grouped together. Each one remained isolated. The tyrannical and haughty air that they emanated was readily apparent. Of the 8 of them, 3 were women and 5 were men. Each one seemed like a viper, cold and grim. There was one of them, a young man, who stuck out more than the others. He had the eyes of a phoenix and beautiful features. He appeared to be smiling, but it was a cold smile that made one feel as if a frigid wind was blowing through you. This was none other than the member of the imperial bloodline clan. There was another young man who had a strange birthmark that almost didn't appear to be a part of his body at all. It seemed to be slowly wriggling across his face, a shocking image that would make anyone who glanced at it look twice. Next to that group were the people from the southern domain. As he laid eyes upon them, Meng Hao's eyes softened a bit. The southern domain was his home. Most accurately speaking, he was someone from the southern domain. There were a total of 7 people from the southern domain. From the way they were organized, Meng Hao could quickly see which alliances now existed between various sects and clans. Wang Lihai and Han Bei were together, which meant that the Wang clan and the Black Sieve sect were in cooperation. Song Yunchu was nowhere to be seen. If Meng Hao's guesses were correct, Song Yunchu had most likely met his fate at the hands of Jai Xiaxia. She surely had killed him to remove him as a witness. Eventually, Meng Hao's gaze came to fall on one of the women from the southern domain. Although her physical features were unfamiliar, as soon as their eyes met, Meng Hao gaped. It's her. This chapter was sponsored by Espen Leonhardsen, Nissen Gurung, Hyo Budeman, Kai Yip, and R. Gronier. Chapter 594, Pain in the Whole Body. Meng Hao's memories of her were somewhat vague. He had actually not interacted with her much at all. In fact, if he recalled matters correctly, they hadn't even met each other. There was only one thing connecting them, and that was the Song clan's search for a son-in-law. In the end, although they were clearly strangers, they were still connected together. Most accurately speaking, this was Meng Hao's beloved from the Song clan. Because she was a daughter of the Song clan, it was impossible for her to have a second beloved, not after the search for a son-in-law. Her reputation and the face of the Song clan could not permit that. After Meng Hao fled, the Song clan did not speak of the matter to outsiders. However, to the young woman, the entire matter came as quite a blow. She had always been a tender and delicate girl. Although she had outstanding latent talent, her heart was weak. That made it hard for her to be strong. She was like a flower in a greenhouse who feared the rain of the outside world. That was how Meng Hao remembered Song Jia. She was beautiful and had gentle eyes, with a tender weakness deep within her expression. 1. Song Jia appeared a few times throughout the story. The majority of her characterization occurred in chapters 186, 189, and 190. Now, however, 100 years had passed. Song Jia had changed. Her eyes were filled with strength, and the weakness that she had concealed deep in her heart all those years ago had been shed. She had grown up. She had been left with no choice other than to grow up. After the matter with Meng Hao, she had no chance to choose a new beloved. Strangely, the Song clan patriarch made no extra demands of her, and in fact treated her quite politely. It made her feel almost like she was an outsider. She hadn't understood it back then, but many years later she came to realize that none of it had anything to do with her. Starting with that search for a son-in-law, everything had changed. She had come to understand that, in addition to her identity as a member of the Song clan, she had acquired some other mysterious background. The power of that background made it so that everyone in the Song clan trembled like cicadas in winter when they faced her. It was as if they didn't know what to do with her. All the resources of the clan came to be at her disposal. In fact, it came to the point where she seemed to be even more important than her older brother, Song Yunchu. All her demands were complied with, which led to increasingly intense jealousy on the part of her older brother. The more he pushed against her, the more she had backed down. However, by the time the primordial demon immortal plane arrived, Song Yunshu had only become more aggressive than before. In fact, in the first plane, were it not for her being completely on guard, she might very well have died at his hands. That matter had filled her heart with intense pain. She immediately recognized Meng Hao. The complicated feelings in her heart had been knotting up there for more than 100 years. When their gazes met, she gave him a slight nod. Meng Hao gazed back silently for a moment, and then looked away. And he saw Li Shiki. He instantly thought of Wang Yaokai, who joined the Reliance sect along with Meng Hao that year. He also thought of Little Tiger, who he hadn't seen after leaving the state of Zhao. Perhaps he had left along with Old Turtle Reliance. 1. Wang Yaokai and Little Tiger joined the Reliance sect at the same time as Meng Hao. After re-encountering Little Tiger in Chapter 71, Meng Hao came to the conclusion that he killed Wang Yaokai to acquire the precious pearl treasure. However, Wang Yaokai later turned out to be alive and a member of the Blood Demon sect. He made his first reappearance in Chapter 120 and following chapters when he participated in the Blood Immortal Legacy Tournament. He was also at the Song clan's search for a son-in-law starting in Chapter 187, where he behaved oddly but also stood by Meng Hao. Before he realized what was happening, the feeling of the passage of time appeared in Meng Hao's heart. He sighed inwardly. Sometimes, it is only when encountering old friends that such a feeling will give rise to sighing and sobbing. Li Shiki smiled slightly, looking very cool and collected. Meng Hao nodded, then glanced over the other cultivators from the southern domain. The rest were people he didn't recognize. However, one of them gave him a feeling that reminded him of the Li clan Dao child who had died at his hands, Li Dai. 1. Li Dai was the Dao child who Meng Hao fought in the Blood Immortal Legacy Tournament. After severing his arm, they faced off again at the Song clan's search for a son-in-law. Later, Meng Hao killed him in Chapter 304. This new man was tall and strapping, with a gaze like a blade. He stood there like a sheathed sword, ready to burst into action and split apart heaven and earth. This was the current generation Dao child of the Li clan, Li Tiandao. There was another cultivator who didn't look very impressive. It was an old, gaunt man who appeared to be all smiles, but whose expression was one of envy as he looked at Meng Hao. Meng Hao didn't recognize him, but as he stood there among the other southern domain cultivators, he caused a feeling of loathing to rise up within Meng Hao. He didn't see anyone from the Violet Fate sect, the Solitary Sword sect, or any disciples from the other sects. He was a bit puzzled by that, but this was not the time to make inquiries. Finally, there were cultivators from the Western Desert, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say the Black Lands. There was Zhao Fang and Duo Lan, as well as two others that he didn't recognize. He didn't see Patriarch Huyan anywhere. 1. Zhao Fang is the guy Meng Hao offered to watch out for in exchange for protection for the Golden Crow tribe. Duo Lan is the chosen from the Butterfly Demon sect. There were quite a few people he didn't know here. In contrast, everyone here seemed to know exactly who he was. He was Qi Jiusi, son of a paragon, the #1 silkprince in the Demon Immortal sect, one of the masters of the Demon Entente. He was famous, which of course filled everyone here with envy. That was especially so after the shocking events of the Demon Immortal Pagoda. The envy in some of these people was rooted deep in their hearts and had transformed into deep jealousy. To these people, Meng Hao was the chosen of the illusory ancient second plane, brilliant and splendorous. Glancing over them all, he grinned and leaned up against the doorframe. With a smile, he said, "Hello, fellow Taoists. What matter is it that you wish to discuss here with humble old me?" He truly looked like a silkprince now, especially the way he leaned up against the doorframe. He seemed at ease, which caused everyone present to frown. However, there was nothing they could do about it. They were inner sect disciples, and the difference between their status and Meng Hao's was like the difference between heaven and earth. In fact, many of them would never even dare to meet Meng Hao in person. If it weren't for the fact that they were being forced by urgent circumstances, and faced with the potential of incredible profit that they couldn't simply abandon, then they would never be willing to allow Meng Hao to see them in such a position as they were. Some of them had even considering trying to hide their faces or use other methods to attend this meeting. However, as soon as they got near to Meng Hao, he would be able to sense who they were, so any attempts at concealment would be useless. The only way to be completely safe was to stay far away from him. However, this meeting was far too important. They need to show the spirit of good faith, otherwise, there wouldn't even be the slightest chance of success. That was why the Fang clan and the Jai clan had joined forces along with all the others. Their alliance had only one adversary, Meng Hao. They would combine all their power and then bring it to bear in the negotiations to come. That was the only way they all would dare to meet with Meng Hao in person. Such frustration was something that blazing suns like them would find difficult to accept in the outside world. As Meng Hao's words echoed out, everyone was silent. Nobody responded. All of them began to exchange glances, until finally the gazes began to fall onto the Jai and Fang clans. As for the Jai clan, they maintained their silence and looked over at the Fang clan. Fang Yu cleared her throat and looked at Meng Hao. "There's something we would like to ask you to go the trouble of helping us with," she said. "Of course there will be compensation, and a lot of it." It wasn't clear how Fang Yu seemed to understand Meng Hao so well, but as soon as the words came out of her mouth, his interest seemed to be sparked. "It's actually quite a simple thing," she continued. "You've surely seen the staircase floating above the pit between the third and fourth peaks. All you have to do is climb that staircase to the top and then leave this place. That's all. In exchange, each of us here will give you 100,000 spirit stones as compensation. Look, there are dozens of people here. Therefore, we're talking about millions of spirit stones. That's quite a bit of profit for very little work, don't you think? You really need to listen to your big sis here." She winked at him, after which he began to perform some calculations. I don't think so, big sis. I've been getting a lot of headaches lately. Also, my shoulder got twisted while I was practicing cultivation. And my legs. I think it might be that I just can't acclimate myself to this place. Every day they ache constantly." He rolled his eyes, pulling a long face. As soon as he said this, unsightly expressions appeared on the faces of the others present. Although no one spoke, they were murmuring to themselves. A cultivator getting a headache. Who would possibly believe that? A twisted shoulder because of cultivation. It's not like he was practicing the spider and toad skill. How could he possibly twist his shoulder? And then there was the expression "can't acclimate." This made them want to curse him. None of them had experienced anything like that, and yet Meng Hao had. Furthermore, all of them had entered here in soul only. Who had ever heard of a soul that couldn't acclimate? "Look here at my neck. It hurts really bad right here." Massaging the spot, he sighed and continued. "I think I need to go back to my immortal's cave and lay down for a bit. I'll have my dad call some of the junior sisters over to do some massage and other blood flow invigoration techniques. As for this favor of yours, I'm afraid I really can't help out." Everyone else was on the verge of going crazy, but had no choice other than to suppress their fury. From their perspective, Meng Hao was brazenly showing off his own identity and the fact that he had a paragon as a dad. He was going to call some junior sisters to massage him and stimulate his blood flow. This caused all of the male cultivators to clench their jaws tightly. Next, Meng Hao said something that arose even more fury. "Well then, it's starting to get dark out. Dad's waiting for me to eat dinner, so I should go. See you." Yawning, he turned to leave. "Enough," roared Fang Yu, clenching her fists tightly. "Your constant yapping about my dad this and my dad that. Is Qi Yunhai really your dad?" As soon as the words left her mouth, Fang Yu regretted speaking them. Meng Hao stopped in place. He turned to look at her coldly. "Even though I don't actually know who my father is," he said, "that doesn't have anything to do with you." Fang Yu truly wished to enter the third plane. However, she also was looking out for Meng Hao's best interests. The words she had spoken just now had only come out in the heat of anger. "Look," she continued quickly, "all we want you to do is climb a staircase. Then you can lead us out of the second plane and into the third plane. It's a simple thing for you. Besides, you can acquire a lot of good fortune in the third plane. In addition, it will put you on good terms with everyone here. When you get back to South Heaven later on, then your path." Meng Hao understood all of that. Furthermore, he felt no ill will at all coming from Fang Yu, and as such, also felt no hostility toward her. His expression softened a bit. "I can take you all into the third plane," he said coolly. "However, 100,000 spirit stones isn't enough. I want half of what you acquire within the third plane. If all of you agree, then we can conclude this bargain now. All of you can swear an oath from your heart. If you break it, you will become one with the Tao. We cultivators place a lot of importance on oaths, especially ones that have to do with cultivation. You don't want to cause entanglements that will hinder progress in your cultivation base and eventually cause you to be destroyed in body and soul. If you don't agree, then I'll consider the matter ended, and we can just wait peacefully for the second plane to collapse. Whatever choice you make it quickly." With that, Meng Hao turned to leave. "Don't you want to go to the third plane?" called out Wang Lihai. Without even looking back, Meng Hao said, "What I've acquired in the second plane is already sufficient. It doesn't matter at all whether I go to the third plane or not." With that, he made his way off into the distance. Chapter 595. The love of a father is like a mountain. Everyone left behind stood there silently, wrestling with their thoughts and emotions. Their fury toward Meng Hao might be raging to the heavens, but they were also left with no other alternatives. The staircase had appeared because of Meng Hao, and he was the only one who could climb it. They had tried, of course, all of them, but all they could do was see it, not touch it. A few days later, they all met again. Everyone stood in front of Meng Hao and swore an oath promising that after the third plane ended, they would give him the share that he had demanded initially. Oaths were made and witnessed, all based on the Tao. In the future, it didn't matter what these South Heaven cultivators acquired in the third plane, they would have no basis for complaint. If they broke their promise, the oath would still stand. Any hesitation on their part could influence their cultivation base. If it was just some words or an ordinary oath, it wouldn't be anything extraordinary. However, when the time came to speak the oath, Meng Hao unexpectedly produced a seemingly simple, and yet also dangerous and vicious Taoist magic. It was something that anyone at the foundation establishment stage or higher could cultivate, called Tao certification. A few days ago outside Qi Yunhai's immortal's cave, Meng Hao had requested to have this very Taoist magic. It was specifically used in this ancient age to bind agreements using Taoist magic. With it in place, if the agreement was broken, the soul would be shredded, great Taos would be unattainable, and the cultivation base would decline. There was nothing anyone could do. In order to get into the third plane, they had to cautiously swear their oaths, using the Tao certification as a pledge, and then complete the agreement. There were some people who refused at first, but Meng Hao didn't need to do anything. All it took was some pressure from the others, and they finally gritted their teeth and accepted. After all, nobody was willing to be the one to pay a heavy price, while others paid nothing. There was one thing nobody seemed to notice. Although everyone assumed that everyone else was present, Xianxia and Patriarch Huyan were missing. Meng Hao also swore an oath. According to their requirements, he would climb the mighty staircase. However, he would pick the exact time. He also promised that in the coming days here in the second plane, he would not use his power and influence to exert pressure on them. They would no longer need to be so cautious and do everything from within the shadows. They had been waiting for such a promise for a long time. Many wondered if anyone from their sect or clan who had come here in the past had ever dealt with anything as frustrating as this. Up to now, they hadn't dared to make any public appearances or go anywhere near the fourth peak. In fact, whenever they saw any silkpins flying through the air, they would duck their heads for fear of Meng Hao showing up. Their days had passed in this manner for months now, and they had endured as long as they could. At long last they could relax a bit and enjoy sunlight of this ancient time. After the agreements were all formalized, Meng Hao realized that the time to leave this place was fast approaching. He would depart from this ancient, illusory world and return to reality. In truth, none of the things here were things he couldn't part with. The Silkpint's lifestyle, his identity, all of it was merely a dream. When waking up from the dream, it could all be forgotten. However, there was one thing that he wasn't willing to forget: his father from this life, Qi Yunhai. The fatherly love that he displayed made Meng Hao want to be immersed here and never wake up. He didn't want the dream to end, and didn't want to forget Qi Yunhai. In this illusory ancient world, he had finally experienced what it felt like to have a father at his side. That feeling made up for some of the sorrow that had lurked in his heart for so long. He gave up on Tao magic enlightenment. Other than concocting pills, he spent most of his time sitting cross-legged outside of Qi Yunhai's immortal's cave. Although Qi Yunhai never opened the door, Meng Hao stayed, occasionally saying one thing or another. That was how life went on, peacefully and quietly. There were no shocking events. Everything was ordinary. Su Qing was still in secluded meditation, never having opened her eyes even once. Meng Hao was used to such a lifestyle by now. In fact, on more than one occasion, he thought to himself that if things continued on this way forever, it wouldn't be so bad. Half a month later, the ghost images were appearing just about every day. Meng Hao knew that he needed to leave. The unwillingness to part, and the complicated, embarrassing thoughts all sent him into a melancholy state of mind. He looked up at the sky. He looked out at the lands around him. He looked at the 7 peaks of the first heaven. He looked at the 4th peak. He looked at Qi Yunhai's immortal's cave. Then he closed his eyes and thought about all the things that had occurred here. In the very beginning, he had admitted that he was wrong. Later, he was whipped. After that, inside the demon immortal pagoda, he was doted upon by Qi Yunhai, his father in this life. All of these things were unforgettable memories for Meng Hao. He suddenly had the strong desire to offer thanks to Qi Jiusi. He wanted to thank him for sending him to this place. He wanted to help Qi Jiusi achieve his aim and do the same for himself. The love of a father is like a mountain. Perhaps this new line of thinking influenced his Tao of alchemy. That night would be the last night. He concocted pills in the second plane. As for what medicinal plants he used to concoct the batch of pills, Meng Hao didn't even remember. He was submerged in his respect for Qi Yunhai, in the beauty he had experienced in the past days, and in the emotions that existed between father and son. That was what he was thinking about as he placed the ingredients into the pill furnace. The flavor and aroma of these medicinal plants represented various shades of Meng Hao's heart. They mixed together as he began to concoct, and he completely disregarded any thoughts of success or failure. There were only memories, memories of everything that had happened in his place, memories of Qi Yunhai and his fatherly love, memories of his own childhood and the vague image of his own father. No moon hung in the night sky. Meng Hao concocted without even thinking about it. Soon, the pill furnace began to thrum with an indescribable sound. It sounded like a song of immortals, like a funeral dirge, sometimes cheerful, sometimes melancholy. The song contained reluctance to part as it slowly drifted out. It echoed about the fourth peak, causing everyone to suddenly lift up their heads and look toward the location atop the mountain from which the song originated. It was like a wind that swept over the hearts of everyone present. It caused ripples to appear that nudged the memories in their hearts, making them recall their past. Within the depths of their own memories, everyone was different. Some were like children who had just grown up. Such ones looked at the stooped figure of their father and realized that he was already an old man, and then they felt pain in the depths of their heart. Others remembered how they used to be when they were young. When their father was strict, rebellious thoughts would bubble up in their hearts and they would grumble inwardly, "Would you just stop blabbering?" However, after many years passed, when they faced their white-haired father as he lay sick in bed, they would clasp his emaciated hand. Tears would stream down their face and they would moan to themselves, "Father, please, just talk to me a little bit more, okay?" There were many people who subconsciously ceased to practice cultivation. As they recalled the past, they stared up at the mountain peak and began to weep silently. Su Qing opened her eyes. As she looked around blankly, pain rose up within her. She thought about her home and the vague image of her long-dead parents. "I want to go home," she murmured. The song echoed out from within the pill furnace to fill the entire fourth peak. Meng Hao didn't know it because he was completely lost in thought. Concocting pills is like making music or carving wood. One can take inexpressible thoughts and feelings and pour them inside the creation. The sound of the medicinal pills being concocted had started out ordinary and mediocre, but now it contained emotion. It contained Meng Hao's thoughts and feelings, almost as if it had a life of its own, a spirit. The music of it exceeded all the sounds that nature could produce. After all, the most moving thing of all is love. And although romantic love is beautiful, it pales in comparison to the selflessness of family love. Gradually, the disciples on the third peak and the fifth peak heard the song of the pills being concocted. The song needed no explanation. As soon as they heard it, they stopped cultivating and stood there mutely. Everyone began to think of their father. More and more disciples grew silent as the song washed over them, various images rising up from their memories to fill their minds. Father is right there, a pipe in his mouth, his face covered with wrinkles. As he turns his head, he smiles in a way that calms me. Then he tousles my hair. The sun is shining and I'm sitting on Father's shoulders, high up in the air, laughing happily. Back then, I didn't know that my laughter was my father's happiness. I don't want to see his strong, steady hands slowly grow thin and wrinkled. Wang Lihai heard the song and immediately stopped meditating. He looked off into the darkness of the night, and then thought back to his own strict father. Anbei sat there silently, and her heart suddenly felt as if it were tearing into pieces. She lowered her head as she thought of her father, and how he had limped as they strolled together through the Black Sieve sect all those years ago. Soon, people in the second and sixth peaks also heard the song. It was filled with the love of a father, fierce and incapable of being dispersed. Even the most evil person in heaven and earth would begin to reminisce when they heard this song. "I remember when you raised your hand at me, sir, and I glared back furiously. I fought back, then left and slammed the door. I never saw your trembling body and the look of disappointment in your eyes. One rainy evening I was sick in bed. I opened my blurry eyes to see you, your hair white, prostrating in front of the statues of the gods, praying for me to be restored to health. You bustled about, you sold everything, all to make sure that I recovered properly. When I saw that, my hands started to shake and my heart tore. I wanted to open my mouth and say, "Father, I was wrong." The song of the pills being concocted gradually reached the first peak and the seventh peak. All of the regions of the demon immortal sect's first heaven could hear it. Everyone was listening, including outer sect disciples, inner sect disciples, conclave disciples, elders. Everyone. Even the most powerful people in this world, the immortals, were affected by the song and began to reminisce. A resonance was created and memories floated up. In this instant, the entire demon immortal sect was completely silent except for the song. Everyone was listening to it and thinking of the past. The paragons of the first, second, third, fifth, sixth, and seventh peaks. 6 paragons all heard the song. They looked up toward the fourth peak, their expressions mournful. They could see Meng Hao concocting pills, and they could hear Meng Hao's voice within. Even the paragon who hated Qi Jiusi the most could do nothing more than sigh. "He's finally grown up, Brother Yunhai. I wish you good luck on your journey." It was in this moment that another sound rose up within the demon immortal sect. It was the sound of bells, a death knell. This chapter was sponsored by Jusa. Chapter 596. The oil was exhausted and the lamp was dry. On the second peak, Song Jia leaned against a pine tree, staring blankly toward the fourth peak. Perplexity filled her eyes and tears streamed down her face. The song of the medicinal pills echoed within her ears, sending wave after wave of ripples through her heart. Scenes rose up from her memories. She saw her father and herself. Some people call a daughter a pearl in the palm. From what Songjia remembered, she was the pearl in her father's palm. The song of the medicinal pills echoed out, rising and falling throughout the first heaven. 1,000,000 people heard it and were affected, even Fang Yu. She sat there silently, complex emotions filling her. She felt agitated yet reminiscent of her scholarly father, seemingly gentle but strict, and of her childhood's soft, sweet moments. What agitated her most was sensing, in the fourth peak song, a father's love from Meng Hao toward one who was not his father. "Dad," she murmured, "did you really make the right choice back then?" Her eyes filled with tears. She thought back to when she was small, how she would often see her mother weeping, while her father stood at the window, looking off into the distance, a profound, complex look in his eyes. Within that look was a type of love that Fang Yu didn't understand back then. After growing up, when she thought back to it, she realized that it was love. It was not love for her, but for someone far away, in some unknown place. A father's love differs from a mother's. It is more reserved, more silent, like a mountain. When you are a child, your father is your guardian angel. When you become a teenager, he becomes an obstacle. Then you see yourself as superior, him beneath you. Once you reach middle age, you look at that mountain and suddenly realize he was always there, watching you proudly. No matter how arrogant or selfish you were, he would forgive you without even saying a word. You will feel forlorn and suddenly realize that is the love of a father. When you have it, you might not feel it deeply. However, once you lose it, you lose the heaven of your heart. When a child wishes to care for a parent, only to find them gone, well, that is a sorrow that brings the deepest weeping. As Meng Hao concocted, the song of the medicinal pills echoed throughout the first heaven. Throughout the 7 great mountain peaks, 1,000,000 disciples were immersed in silence. Even the paragons were lost in thought. They listened to the song and recalled images of the past. "In the past, I viewed myself as incredible. Sir, you said many things back then. You tried to involve yourself in my affairs, but at that time, I felt that you had changed from before. I felt that I was capable of flying on my own. But then my wings were broken and I became very exhausted. After flying for a long time, I suddenly looked back and thought of you, sir, and about all the things you told me. By the time I looked back, however, all I could see was your tomb. I stood in front of your tomb and wept. I wanted to say, 'Father, I was wrong.' In the past, I looked down at you, then turned away, leaving you to prove myself. Years later, after I conquered the world, I came back to you in all my glory to look at your shocked face. Instead, what I saw was how proud you were of me, sir. Pain filled my heart. By that time, your hair had long since become white. I embraced my aged father and whispered, 'Father, I'm back.'" Tears rolled down Jai Xiaoxiao's face as she immersed herself in memories of many things. The image of her master floated in Li Shiki's mind. She didn't know who her father really was. When she first opened her eyes, the first person she saw wasn't her master but someone else. However, she came to view her master like a father. She called him master, but in her heart she called him father. She was adopted, having lost her parents when she was still wearing swaddling clothes. As she grew up, she became beautiful. However, from a young age, she had been cursed with a strange deformity. Only her master's years of effort allowed her to live a normal life. Without her master, there would be no Li Shiki. Once long ago, he had taken her to look for clues about her hometown. After much searching, Li Shiki finally spoke up, her voice soft. "Master, there's no need to search anymore. In this life, you are my master. I hope that in the next life you can be my father." The song of the pills being concocted continued to echo out, moving everyone deeply. Meng Hao's expression was blank. These medicinal pills, this batch, this furnace and its song, were filled with reluctance to part from Qi Yunhai and Meng Hao's desire for a father's love. He was completely unaware that a white-robed figure had appeared behind him. The figure had long hair and was emaciated. His entire person emanated an ancient aura. It was none other than Qi Jiusi. He stood behind Meng Hao, staring at the pill furnace as if he could see into eternity. The medicinal pills were being concocted by Meng Hao, yet the song contained the voices of both him and Qi Jiusi. Then the death knell began to toll, ringing out again and again. A death knell was not rung at the death of every disciple. Even conclave disciples did not qualify, nor elite apprentices. Only those who rendered incredible services to the sect qualified to receive its death knell, as protection on the way to the underworld. Other than such people, only when a paragon perished would the sect ring its death knell. When the ninth bell tolled, Meng Hao suddenly trembled. He slowly lifted his head, as did Qi Jiusi. "Bells," he murmured. Fear filled his heart. He didn't care about the pill concocting, the illusion, the ancient times, whether these were truly celestial pills or if he succeeded. A realization dark as night swept over him. Trembling, he rose to his feet. A roar erupted from the pill furnace. The medicinal pills and furnace exploded, their connection to Meng Hao severed, blood sprayed from his mouth. The blood spattered onto the pill remnants, blood filled with indescribable thoughts, carrying his unceasing love for a father. "Dad," without hesitation, Meng Hao rushed outside. He left the pill-concocting workshop, unaware that 9 destroyed pills lay in the shattered furnace. However, the original batch held 10. The medicinal strength of the 9 destroyed pills had merged into the 10th. The 10th pill appeared, glittering, as it transformed from illusion into reality. The pill absorbed Meng Hao's blood, infused with his true emotions, and began to transmogrify, creating something from nothing. However, it didn't matter that the pill was something from nothing, or that it met all his dreams. In his mind existed no pill, only an anxiety so intense he forgot himself. He rushed from the workshop, from the cave, from the entire area. He transformed into a beam of light shooting toward Qi Yunhai's cave. The death knell sounded throughout the 7 great mountain peaks of the first heaven. Dong, dong. At the 13th toll, Meng Hao arrived at Qi Yunhai's cave. Seeing the door sealed shut, tears poured down Meng Hao's face. He kneeled before it. "Father," his voice wasn't very loud, but it filled the entire 4th mountain. At some point, he had thoroughly immersed himself in this ancient, illusory world. Qi Yunhai had appeared to fill a void of fatherly love that had existed since his childhood. That void was something that Meng Hao usually kept carefully hidden away. He did not want anyone to touch it, not even himself. But Qi Yunhai had appeared, filling that void. Meng Hao's heart was being ripped into pieces. To him, heaven and earth had lost all color. An indescribable feeling surged over him. He felt like his body had been turned into a black hole that was consuming his soul and his life, his everything. "Father," tears streamed down his face as he looked at the cave door. The death knell continued to echo. It had tolled 19 times, each toll sending a green beam around the 4th peak, creating 19 glowing rings. As tears rolled down Meng Hao's face, the cave door opened silently. Qi Yunhai's exhausted voice suddenly came from within. "Don't cry." Meng Hao's head shot up immediately, and his body began to tremble. Without hesitation, he rushed inside. The cave was dark, but he could still see Qi Yunhai sitting cross-legged on his stone bed. Qi Yunhai was even more ancient than before. He seemed to emanate an aura of complete decay. White nodes of light pulsated from him. His body was undergoing passage into meditation. As for the lamp next to him, the oil was exhausted and the lamp was dry. Its light was weak, as if the slightest wind could blow it out. An enormous coffin rested nearby, its surface carved with auspicious beasts. It seemed ordinary, but if you looked closely, you could see how incredible it was. "Guc, don't cry," he said hoarsely, looking at Meng Hao with a tender expression. "You've grown up. Daddy can't stay with you forever. From now on, you'll need to rely on yourself. However, there is one last thing I can do for you. Before I pass away into meditation, I will give you a treasure forged by me." The death knell outside had reached the 57th toll. When it reached 99, the soul would disperse. With the 99 rings of light, it would return to heaven and earth, entering the underworld. Note from Urgent, the love of a father is like a mountain. For many years I didn't understand this. I truly came to understand what it means to be a father 8 years ago when I became a father. Then I understood how the love of a father and mother are different. When I was young, I read an essay by Zhu Ziqing called Retreating Figure. I didn't understand it then, but many years later it came to mind. Every time I read it, I understand it more, and the meaning becomes more profound. Every time I read it, I understand more about what it means to be a father. Today, I won't ask for any monthly vote tickets. Instead, I wish a safe journey through life to all fathers. Brothers and sisters, please spend more time with your father. Take more opportunities to wish him well. It wasn't until I had my own child that I realized how difficult it is for a father and mother to raise a child. This chapter was sponsored by Jusa. Chapter 597, I'll Make You Proud, Sir. With the soul divergence incantation, you can cultivate an undying soul. Unfortunately, the difficulty level is too high for you. However, this coffin can help you cultivate it. With it, even should great calamity arise, you can continue to live. He only spoke a few sentences, but even that left Qi Yunhai gasping for breath. His face was pale, and the white nodes of light around him grew denser. They formed a glowing halo surrounding his body. He looked kindly at Meng Hao, his gaze filled with doting kindness, reluctance to part, and love. He feared the child he left behind might be bullied, lonely, or taciturn. Meng Hao bit his lip as he kneeled wordlessly in front of Qi Yunhai, tears flowing. "There's no need to cry," said Qi Yunhai. "If men cry too much in our day and age, then their Tao becomes unstable. Come here, kid." He raised his hand, and Meng Hao, tears dripping, stepped forward. Qi Yunhai's hand, covered with so many wrinkles, gently patted Meng Hao's head. "You've grown up, Dad." Meng Hao looked at the death aura surrounding the withered Qi Yunhai, his heart tearing into pieces. His body trembled as he realized his father was about to leave him. He had long viewed Qi Yunhai as his own father. Everyone dies eventually, that is something we can't change. Lord Li returned life to the masses, and considering my position, I must respect his decision. "Why?" murmured Meng Hao, the tears pouring down. "Why do you have to respect it? We cultivators practice cultivation to gain eternal life, don't we? What's the point in abandoning eternal life?" Qi Yunhai was silent for a moment before raising his head. His gaze seemed to peer beyond the cave to some distant future. The death knell outside had reached the 69th toll, echoing endlessly. "We don't just cultivate to gain eternal life. No, we pursue the Tao. For those who strive after the Tao, life is a morning and death is an evening. For those who seek the Tao, when evening comes, of what use is longing?" Qi Yunhai lowered his head to look at Meng Hao. "Death and life are not important to me. Without Lord Li, your father would have long since died countless times over. I do not fear death. The only thing that troubles me is you." Qi Yunhai tousled Meng Hao's hair, his eyes filled with kindness and growing doting indulgence. "I should have perished many years ago," he continued. "But I was worried about you, so I put things off until today. If it were possible, I would accompany you a bit further, just like in the demon immortal pagoda, me in the lead, you following, off into the distance." He smiled, but his face was pale. White nodes swirled around him, making his smile seem distant. "Dad," said Meng Hao, pulling at Qi Yunhai's hand. "All of your brothers and sisters have already gone. Now that I'm leaving, you won't have any relatives left in the world. I hope that in the future, you will learn to be a bit more sensible." As Qi Yunhai gazed at Meng Hao, kindness and reluctance to part intensified in his eyes. What concerned him most in life was this child kneeling before him. If there were any hope to buy more time, he would seize it, watching Qi Jiusi truly grow up. Meng Hao could not voice what he felt. He felt stabs of pain, as if his world were falling apart. A vortex inside him sucked in all his thoughts. He could only clasp Qi Yunhai's hand. He could only cry. Words failed him. "Don't be sad. Your brothers and sisters are waiting for me. I'm their father too. I need to spend some time with them also." Jiusi, Daddy hopes that one day, when I'm in the underworld, you'll make me proud. Outside, the bells had tolled 89 times. Qi Yunhai's body was now completely surrounded by spinning white nodes of light. The hand Meng Hao held grew faint. Only his kind smile remained clear. His eyes faded. In the final 10 tolls, they would lose all brightness, transforming into countless dots of light before vanishing. Meng Hao's heart felt torn into pieces. His body trembled as he tried to clasp Qi Yunhai's disappearing hand. Dad! Suddenly, Qi Yunhai's fading eyes focused, as if he'd gathered all his remaining life force to look at Meng Hao, as if in a daze. A figure slowly materialized behind Meng Hao. It was a white-robed man whose features looked nothing like Meng Hao's, with long hair, young-looking yet radiating ancientness. This was none other than Qi Jiusi. Qi Jiusi looked at his father with tears in his eyes. He slowly kneeled down, his body superimposing with Meng Hao's. A smile appeared on Qi Yunai's face. He had long since put all the pieces together. He nodded and slowly reached out to touch Meng Hao's forehead. Or, perhaps he was touching Qi Jiusi's forehead. Images flooded Qi Yunhai's mind. The destruction of the demon immortal sect, Qi Jiusi's final battle, his return to life, watching over the sect alone for tens of thousands of years. Qi Jiusi looked at Qi Yunhai. Tears streamed down his face as he softly said, "Dad, I learned to be a bit more sensible. I'm sorry for everything before. I'm sorry, Father. Everything was my fault." At long last, he could see his father and speak those words. The words were Qi Jiusi's, and they were also Meng Hao's. Two people, one set of words. It was hard to tell if Qi Jiusi was borrowing Meng Hao's mouth, or Meng Hao was borrowing Qi Jiusi's soul. "Dad, I've grown up. You can stop worrying, sir. I will always make you proud." Qi Yunhai looked at Meng Hao and Qi Jiusi for a long moment. His face filled with a kind smile, one of admiration and deep content. "Thank you," said Qi Yunhai, his voice hoarse. "You also are my son. We are father and son in this life." He gave Meng Hao a profound look, within which shone doting indulgence and kindness. White nodes of light engulfed his body. Meng Hao trembled as the hand that held Qi Yunhai now grasped nothing. The final flame in the lamp was extinguished. "Dad," tears rained down his face as he watched Qi Yunhai fade. Outside, the 99th bell toll echoed. One less than 100. Perfection was not permitted. The death knell protected the path, guarded the way. It could not have one more or one less. 99 paths to the underworld. That is the death knell that tolls when a paragon perishes. The death knell echoed throughout the 7 great mountain peaks of the first heaven. In that moment, the million cultivators in the 7 peaks kowtowed toward the 4th peak, including the other paragons. On the 4th peak, weeping rose. All disciples turned toward Qi Yunhai's cave and began to kowtow. Qi Yunhai had perished. As Meng Hao watched Qi Yunhai vanish completely, the sound of wailing drifted in from outside. He knelt silently for a long time before finally rising to his feet. Clutching his chest, he walked from the cave. Outside, all 4th peak disciples stood, eyes on him. As he looked back at them, profound grief filled his face. He looked up into the sky and sunlight poured down. For a moment he thought he saw Qi Yunhai's shadow. 99 beams of light swirled around him, escorting him away. As Qi Yunhai made his way off into the distance, he glanced at the lands below and at Meng Hao. As sunlight poured down onto Meng Hao, he saw the image of himself when he first arrived. He remembered seeing Qi Yunhai for the first time, the kindness in his eyes, a forgiveness without limit. After he killed Jai Mingfeng, he was whipped. He remembered Qi Yunhai's voice in his ear, asking why he hadn't cried out. His heart trembled. Then there were the magical items and talismans forged by Qi Yunhai with his life force. In the immortal demon pagoda, when Meng Hao was certain of his defeat, a figure appeared, tousled his hair, and kindly said, "I'll take you the rest of the way." All transformed into a final image of parting. He finally realized, Qi Yunhai had always known he was Qi Jiusi. In the end, he thanked him. He said Meng Hao was also his son. He approved of him. It all seemed a dream, but it was the dream Meng Hao wanted. "The old man is gone," he murmured. Darkness superseded everything in his world. He coughed blood and collapsed. Meng Hao was in a coma for 2 days. When he finally awakened, he saw Su Qing watching over him anxiously. Su Qing accompanied him to Qi Yunhai's funeral. The tomb, in a valley on the 7th peak, held no corpse, only an extinguished oil lamp. Meng Hao was no longer an ordinary disciple or elite apprentice. He was now lord of the 4th peak, though not a paragon. He did not concoct pills or seek Taoist enlightenment. He sat outside his cave, gazing into night and day. He wasn't sure what he sought. He just stared. Several days later, ghost images appeared constantly in the illusory world. Meng Hao knew it was about to vanish. Living and dying, it can be a departure but also a beginning. Meng Hao experienced a flash of insight. He closed his eyes for a long time. When he opened them, he decided to head to the great staircase in the sky. Before leaving, he noticed the pill created from nothing. It brought him no joy. He gazed at it blankly, then carefully put it in his bag of holding. As he stood before the staircase, he looked back at the fourth peak one last time, imprinting it in his memory. Then he turned and stepped onto the staircase no other disciple could see. He walked up, step by step. As he did, all cultivators from the great lands of South Heaven watched him. They waited for Meng Hao to reach the staircase's peak. Then the second plane would conclude, and the third plane would open. This chapter was sponsored by Juse. Chapter 598, The Third Plane. Meng Hao walked slowly, higher and higher. He was soon high in the sky, nearly at the top. He stopped just before the final stair, looking down at the demon immortal plane. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, they were filled with resolve. "Dad, I'm leaving now," he said softly. Then he strode forward onto the final stair. A shocking rumbling sound filled the air, and the entire world began to shake. Meng Hao could see and feel the shaking. But demon immortal sect disciples not from South Heaven had no idea what was occurring. The South Heaven cultivators could feel it, of course, and their faces began to fill with excitement and intense anticipation at the prospect of seeing the third plane with their own eyes. When it came to the demon immortal sect, the first two planes always appeared. The third plane, however, had only appeared a few times throughout all history. It required great destiny or good fortune to make it open. To be able to personally see the opening of the third plane made their hearts burst with passion. Of course, the only one who could most truly witness the disappearance of the second plane and the opening of the third plane was Meng Hao. As of this moment, he was the only person who stood up in midair, looking down at all the people in the world below. When he reached the pinnacle of the great staircase, he looked down at everything, at the increasingly intense shaking and the ghost images. The ghost images would only appear for a moment before disappearing. An invisible, imperceptible, illusory wind sprang up from nowhere. It did not cause anyone's hair to lift up. Instead, it stimulated time. Meng Hao watched all 7 peaks of the first heaven pass through 10,000 years in the blink of an eye. The lush vegetation on the mountain peaks withered and then bloomed again, completely changing in appearance. He saw more extravagant buildings erected on the peaks, and he saw countless lives, people being born, growing old, dying. 10,000 years. Then he saw everything go pitch black. An enormous hand appeared, covering over the entire world. Within that hand, he could just make out an old man in a gold robe. He waved his sleeve, and the heavens changed. The land was bathed in redness, and the stars tumbled about. The ground shook. Meng Hao couldn't see much within the darkness, but he could see the 2 holy lands collapsing. The 3 greater demon mountains shattered. The 7 peaks of the demon immortal sect's first heaven split and cracked. Although the mountains were still in place, many parts were destroyed. Buildings fell to pieces and disciples died. Meng Hao witnessed a great war that shook all of the 9th mountain and sea. The war was fought in the pitch black, so he could not see things clearly, he could only sense them. Soon everything faded away. After a long time, Meng Hao caught sight of a coffin on the 4th peak. A man emerged from within the coffin. He had long black hair and wore a white robe. He stood silently on the 4th peak, as if he were watching over the lands below him for an eternity. All of this was tens of thousands of years of history, all passed in the blink of an eye. Meng Hao eventually closed his eyes, and when he opened them, reality had been restored to the world. There were corpses everywhere, just like before, and ruins. Everything was back to normal. Meng Hao quietly closed his eyes again for a while. When he opened them, he was no longer up in the air, but rather reclining in the coffin on the 4th peak, looking up at the sky. The sky was broken, just like he remembered it had been when he first lay down into the coffin. It was like everything had been a dream, and now he was waking up from the dream. Quietly, he recalled the images of everything that had happened in the ancient, illusory world. Eventually, tears began to seep out of the corners of his eyes. Was it really all just a dream? He wasn't sure how to tell. He slowly sat up and then crawled out of the coffin. As he began to walk away, he suddenly looked back, his mind trembling. The coffin was familiar to him. It was the exact same coffin that Qi Yunhai had made for him back in the illusory ancient times. Perhaps it was more accurate to say that he made it for Kijiusi, the precious treasure to be able to cultivate the soul divergence incantation. Meng Hao looked a bit absent-minded as he stood there. After a long time passed, he turned and looked over the fourth peak. As far as what the place had looked like when he first arrived, he couldn't quite remember clearly. Now, though, even though everything was in ruins, it was all familiar to him. Every little thing was something that existed in his memories, unforgettable. He silently walked to the edge of the top portion of the fourth peak, to the place where he had first seen Kijiusi. He stood in the same place, his back to the first peak, and gazed toward the seventh peak. It wasn't the first time he had stood here. Back in the first plane, he had wondered what Kijiusi was looking at. Now that he stood here looking out in the same direction once again, he knew all too well. You were looking at Father Ki's tomb. In the seventh peak was a mountain valley where one of the most powerful experts in the history of the demon immortal sect had been buried after he perished. It was none other than Qi Yunhai. Meng Hao looked away and then began to walk down the fourth peak. All the various details weren't exactly the same as they had been that year, but even still, Meng Hao was able to find places that he was familiar with. As he walked, his face flickered with an expression of reminiscence. His heart felt heavy. He was like someone who had just awoken from a dream, a bit distracted, somewhat unsure of what was real and what was not. The fourth peak was filled with ruins, and there were many areas that still had the restrictive spells from before. Just such a place suddenly appeared in front of Meng Hao. Gentle, warm light drifted out. It didn't look like much, but if he ignored it or tried to enter it without using the proper method, then it wouldn't matter how powerful his fleshly body was, he would perish without a doubt. The restrictive spell blocked Meng Hao's path. On the other side was a narrow mountain path filled with corpses. Meng Hao was very familiar with this path. It was none other than the way that led to his immortal's cave on the fourth peak. He stood outside the restrictive spell, his expression growing more complex. After a long moment, he closed his eyes. When he opened them, he lifted his right hand up and performed an ancient sealing incantation. Ghost images appeared, and he pressed out lightly up ahead of him. There was no sound. The light of the seemingly eternal restrictive spell suddenly began to flicker rapidly. Gradually it grew thin, until finally an opening appeared. Meng Hao sighed and stepped inside. A melancholy expression appeared on his face as he looked around at the corpses that littered the path. At the end of the path was the Immortal's cave in which he had lived for so many months in the second plane. The door to the Immortal's cave was collapsed. The inside of the cave was empty, filled with dust. The stone soldiers that Qi Yunhai had given him in the second plane were nowhere to be seen. Perhaps they don't even exist anymore, he thought to himself as he sat there in the Immortal's cave. This was the spot he usually meditated in the second plane. From here he could see the sky and the lands. He sat there for a long time. He knew that the other South Heaven cultivators were using every method at their disposal, including methods gained in the second plane, to dig up treasures that remained in the third plane. You could say that the third plane was like a treasure pavilion that had been broken open. Anyone who came here would be certain to have chances to acquire good fortune. After a long time passed, Meng Hao finally stood up. He left what had once been his Immortal's cave and began to walk toward Qi Yunhai's Immortal's cave. There were now no restrictive spells here. All of them had been destroyed in the Great War. In fact, the door of the Immortal's cave hung in fragments, except the sight of the interior of the Immortal's cave left Meng Hao gaping. The layout of the Immortal's cave looked exactly the same as he remembered it being from the second plane. However, the entire place was untainted by even a speck of dust, as if someone came frequently to clean it. Meng Hao stood there looking at the Immortal's cave for a long time, almost as if he wasn't even aware that time was passing by, and he had forgotten that this wasn't the illusory second plane. 3 days later, he finally clasped hands and bowed deeply. He bowed for the dream. He bowed for the father during that lifetime. He bowed for having fully awoken from the dream. The feelings for his father during that life were ingrained in the depths of his heart and were now a part of him. They could not be cut away or lost. He rose to his feet, his eyes filled with determination as he walked down the fourth peak. After leaving the mountain, he took a deep breath and then flew into the air. His heart had now recovered by more than half from the experience in the illusion. His eyes glittered as he shot off into the distance. Rumbling echoed out as he increased his speed. Then, when he was far, far off, he suddenly stopped in place. He looked down at himself, for the first time sparing a moment to examine his body. So the results of the fleshly body cultivation in the ancient illusion are still there. His eyes flickered with a bright light. His time spent cultivating his physical body had not been wasted. As of now, even in the first anima, he had a fleshly body that was as powerful as the fifth anima. I gained the most in the first plane. In the second plane, I also exceeded everyone else, leading to my superiority and advantage. Well then, I think that in the third plane, I also need to be the biggest winner. With that, his body flickered, and a screaming sound filled the air. Before it could emanate out very far, Meng Hao was already nowhere to be seen. If my fleshly body cultivation remained in place then, he shot forward, his gaze coming to rest at stop off in the distance. He didn't realize it, but a bright glow had appeared in his eyes. Within his gaze could be seen anticipation, as well as a bit of nervousness. Well, I wonder if my plan of burying the wooden time swords has succeeded. He took a deep breath. If his plan had succeeded, then the rewards he could acquire would definitely be a defiance of heaven. Taoist magics and fleshly body cultivation were all good, and in fact, Meng Hao was quite content. However, what he looked forward to even more were the wooden time swords. If he had succeeded, then he would be in possession of a precious treasure that could slay immortals. If he had succeeded with the swords, then Meng Hao would have a much deeper understanding of everything that had occurred within the ancient, illusory world. He would then be able to determine whether or not he really could change the future. Although he was aware that the possibility of success was small, he was still filled with expectation. His body flashed as he shot off into the distance at top speed. It didn't take long for him to find one of the 4 locations where he had buried a wooden time sword. Chapter 599, Sword Tip. The locations he had selected were all remote corners of the demon immortal sect, places he had noticed in the first plane, which he was sure would survive. As he neared the first location, he grew nervous. Moments later he arrived, looked over the ruins, took a deep breath and descended. After looking around for a while, he looked down at the ground beneath him. He lifted a foot up into the air and then stamped down, again and again. Booming could be heard as the surface of the ground was destroyed. Countless bits of dirt and rock exploded up into the air as a huge crater appeared beneath Meng Hao. Unfortunately, nothing could be seen within the crater. Meng Hao's face was unsightly as he turned and began to search the entire area. It didn't take long before he had turned virtually everything upside down, and yet still hadn't found a single thing. It appeared as if from the very beginning there had not been any sort of wooden time sword buried here. I failed, he thought, his eyes flashing with an unyielding glint. He flew up into the air and shot toward the second location where he had buried one of the other swords. After arriving, he searched the area thoroughly, but the result was the same. No matter how he searched, he could not find any trace of a wooden time sword. Next he went to the third area, but the result was the same. His heart had now sunk down into his chest, and a bitter smile could be seen on his face. He was now very much certain that the idea he had come up with in the ancient illusory world had failed. Sighing, he headed to the last of the areas where he had buried a sword. It was an area relatively close to the 7th peak. Back in the illusory world, the path to this place had been easy to follow, but now things were different. Danger lurked in all directions, even for Meng Hao. It took him several days to reach the 7th peak and the place where he had buried the 4th wooden time sword. At one time, it had been a mountainous forest. However, the forest had long since been burned into ash. After searching the ruined remnants of the forest for some time, Meng Hao finally found the place where he had hidden the sword. After overturning the area, he found nothing but an empty pit. He let out a long sigh and finally gave up all hope. He knew that this time he had thoroughly failed. He suddenly frowned. Well, if I failed, then where are my wooden time swords? He opened his bag of holding and sure enough, there were only 6 wooden time swords inside. The 4 swords that he had buried were definitely gone. There was something very strange about the whole matter, something that exceeded his imagination. There were many possible explanations, but the one that made the most sense was that, although he had succeeded in burying the 4 wooden time swords, someone else had come along and taken them before him. He shook his head and was about to leave when suddenly, his gaze was drawn to the very edge of the deep pit he had just made. He saw something there that instantly caused a tremor to run through his body. He immediately began to breathe heavily as he stared at what appeared to be an ordinary, fingernail-sized fragment of wood sticking out of the mud. That fragment of wood appeared to be rotten from the passage of time. It looked completely ordinary, stabbed as it was into the mud. That's, Meng Hao panted as he suppressed the excitement in his heart. Exercising great caution, he picked up the wood fragment. It was irregularly shaped, but the tip was actually sharp. It was almost like a sword tip. This is a spring and autumn tree. This is the tip of a wooden sword. His breathing grew more ragged, and his mind roared chaotically. Although he desired nothing more than to succeed, he wasn't even sure how to tell if he had. Right now, his mind was spinning, as he closely examined the sword tip resting there on his palm. No, it looks like. This isn't the wooden sword I originally buried here. As he examined the sword tip, he realized that, shockingly, it contained 30,000 years of time power. However, the wooden fragment was too small, making the power of time unstable. Meng Hao could tell that if he tried to wield it, it would gradually fade away. If I had succeeded with my wooden swords, they would have been buried here for almost 100,000 years. However, this wooden fragment only has 30,000 years. Also, the physical appearance seems a bit different. Meng Hao wasn't quite able to determine exactly what was going on. Now he suddenly wasn't as certain that he had failed in his attempt. Without being able to look at the entirety of the sword, there would be no way to make a final determination. However, he did know that there was absolutely no sensation of the brand he left on his own wooden swords. He carefully put the tiny wooden fragment away. It was impossible to determine if the fragment was part of the sword he had left here to pass through the years. However, considering that there were 30,000 years of time power collected inside the tiny fragment, it could still be regarded as a precious treasure. If I truly failed, then all I lost were 4 wooden time swords. By spending a few spirit stones, I can make more copies. If I succeed, though, then even if someone else took the swords away before I could, they were still personally created by me. If I ever run into them again, I'll know, no matter how many times other people try to refine them. The heart of the swords contains my time power. I will always be the original master of those swords. Meng Hao's eyes flickered. Although he still didn't understand exactly what had happened, he didn't want to spend any more time thinking about it. Looking up, he saw the 7th peak, and a sentimental look appeared in his eyes. That's where Father Key's tomb is. With that, he transformed into a beam of colorful light that shot off toward the burial location of the powerful experts of the various generations of the demon immortal sect. Along the way, he heard the sounds of explosions coming from various districts within the demon immortal sect, as well as the occasional din of battle. The South Heaven cultivators, the 3rd plane, was like a storehouse of treasures. There was good fortune to be acquired everywhere. However, that good fortune was not the same for everyone. It depended on how well prepared each individual was in the 2nd plane, who had the greater understanding, and who had mastered more techniques to open restrictive spells. Those were the keys to success. However, considering treasures were involved, it would be difficult to avoid friction and fighting. Therefore, fierce battles were to be expected. Meng Hao ignored all of that. He didn't actually need to do anything. Thanks to the oath-enforced agreement, whatever the others acquired in here, he would acquire far, far more. As he proceeded forward, the sky gradually began to grow dark. Outside of the 7th peak was the demon immortal sect's graveyard. As he neared, a bright beam of light shot out from the middle of the 7th peak. At first, it wasn't heading toward Meng Hao. However, at some point it seemed to realize who he was, then changed directions and headed toward him. Meng Hao stopped in midair, his expression normal as he coldly watched on. The beam of light moved with incredible speed and emanated a potent aura. It screamed through the air toward him, and as it neared, a young man became visible inside. It was none other than the cultivator from the imperial bloodline clan of the northern reaches. His eyes flashed like lightning, and his face was filled with an expression of ferocity and coldness. He shot toward Meng Hao and was upon him in the blink of an eye. He flashed an incantation gesture, causing 6 illusory black dragons to suddenly shoot forth. Their shocking roars filled the air as they intertwined with each other. A terrifying pressure emanated out, slamming down toward Meng Hao. Each of these 6 black dragons exceeded the great circle of the nascent soul stage. When they merged together, the pressure they emanated was similar to a cultivation base half a step into spirit severing. This young imperial bloodline clan cultivator clearly had an incredible cultivation base. In the blink of an eye, the 6 dragons neared, filling up the entire world in front of Meng Hao. Each of the dragons was hundreds of meters long. Rumbling filled the air as their combined power shot toward him. He gave a cold snort and did nothing to dodge them or retreat. Instead, he strode forward and lifted his right hand up. His fleshly body seemed ordinary, but suddenly it exploded with a power equivalent to the 5th anima. Such strength was also the same as being a half-step into spirit severing. A fist descended, and a thunderous boom filled the air. The roaring of the 6 black dragons suddenly ceased as the shocking explosion rolled over them. Meng Hao's fist seemed to have kicked up a tempest capable of ripping them into shreds. In addition, within Meng Hao's fist could be seen an illusory mountain. This was none other than manifested power of the first level of the mountain-consuming incantation that Meng Hao had gained enlightenment of. The fist shot out, a tempest raged, and a mountain descended. Bo1mm. The 6 black dragons were ripped into pieces. The face of the imperial bloodline clan cultivator from the northern reaches instantly fell. His eyes glowed with astonishment. He obviously had never even considered that Meng Hao could possibly be so powerful. His original plan had been to kill Meng Hao in one decisive attack. If he failed, at least he would be able to feel Meng Hao out. Currently, though, when he saw Meng Hao's cultivation base, his heart sank. He immediately fell back in retreat. "Elder brother Meng, this was just a misunderstanding," he said, his eyes flickering. "First anima," said Meng Hao coolly. His body roared as it exploded with the fearsome power of the first anima. His fleshly body was now similar to the 6th anima. In the blink of an eye, Meng Hao's battle prowess exploded by double. He took a step forward, then transformed into a green mist, within which was a black moon. He appeared directly in front of the young man, who he then punched without hesitation. A boom could be heard. The young man from the northern reaches tried to block with both hands, and a black glow appeared around him. However, the black glow immediately collapsed, and he was sent tumbling backward, blood spraying from his mouth and a look of astonishment filling his face. "You doubled your power in an instant." This young man from the imperial bloodline clan of the northern reaches was named Liu Zichuan. Normally, he was wildly haughty, but at the moment he was shocked to the core. Not a scrap of arrogance could be found in him. 1. Liu Zichuan's name in Chinese is Chinese letter Liu Zichuan. Liu means willow, Zai means child or son, Chuan means river. Coughing up more blood, he forced himself to a halt. His eyes filled with ferocity as he wiped the blood from his mouth and glared at Meng Hao. "Whatever," he said, "you're most likely already at your limit. To explode with double battle power is pretty incredible. You qualify to be my opponent. Well then, allow me to introduce you to something that's called the imperial body." Before Liu Zichuan could finish his lofty speech, Meng Hao coolly interrupted him. "Second anima." Boom! Meng Hao's body instantly became even more shocking. His fleshly body was now equivalent to the fearsomeness of the 7th anima. His explosive battle prowess caused the sky to dim and a fierce wind to spring up. Liu Zichuan's eyebrows shot up and a roaring filled his heart. His mouth went dry, his mind spun, and his eyes went wide. He looked at Meng Hao with complete disbelief, his scalp completely numb. Damn it, this guy's cultivation base is freakish. This is definitely some Taoist magic from the 2nd plane. It might even be one of the top 10. Shocked, Liu Zichuan retreated without hesitation. He fell back quickly, but Meng Hao was even quicker. He took a step forward and then waved a finger. Instantly, the image of a mountain appeared, to shoot rumbling toward Liu Zichuan. Liu Zichuan coughed up some blood, and his body nearly exploded. A profound sense of deadly crisis filled him. He was scared witless. He pushed his hand viciously down onto his chest, causing a pearl to be vomited up. The pearl transformed into a wide net that quickly enveloped Liu Zichuan. There almost seemed to be some power of the underworld fueling the net as it wrapped around him and shot off into the distance. Because of that, Meng Hao's illusory mountain only grazed past and didn't completely smash into him. Even still, Liu Zichuan coughed up some more blood. His heart was in chaos and filled with terror as he shot away. Meng Hao didn't pursue him. Instead, he stood where he was and coolly said, "You now owe me 80% of your gains. If you disagree, I'll kill you." Chapter 600, True Spirit, Night. As Liu Zichuan fled off into the distance, he heard what Meng Hao said. If Meng Hao hadn't made a move against him, he would have laughed coldly with disdain. Now, though, he sensed Meng Hao's killing intent deep in his bones. It didn't matter what type of identity he had. If Meng Hao said he was going to kill someone, he would kill them. Meng Hao's words, filled with the intent to slaughter, left Liu Zichuan's mind trembling. Suddenly, he regretted trying to feel out Meng Hao. Damn it, he thought, suddenly depressed. It's not like I'm the only person he made an agreement with. Everyone did. Why did I have to pick him to test out? He did not dare do anything to cause Meng Hao to question him. Here in the demon immortal sect, if he dared to disrespect Meng Hao, he would be dead for sure. What if I could form an alliance with him? Thought Liu Zichuan. His eyes glittered for a moment, but then grew dark. He suddenly realized from the brief battle that he couldn't gauge Meng Hao's true strength. Meng Hao hadn't unleashed his full potential, and how much he had revealed was impossible to guess. The smartest thing to do is never provoke someone like him. As Liu Zichuan fled into the distance, Meng Hao retracted his gaze and left the third anima, returning to the first. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. They shone with the brilliant glow of a powerful expert. It's difficult to judge how weak or powerful I am exactly. However, if I could achieve the fleshly body strength of the seventh anima while only in the first anima, then, when I entered the seventh anima, I would definitely have a spirit-severing fleshly body. That would be a complete and thorough spirit-severing fleshly body, compatible with my cultivation base. I could definitely slaughter someone of the first severing. His eyes flickered, and he took a deep breath. With that, he continued to fly on toward the graveyard. Soon he arrived at a large stretch of ruins. This was the graveyard. There were corpses laying about everywhere, and the tombs of many of the past experts had been transformed into nothing but pits. Funerary objects had long since been disturbed and taken away. There were few restrictive spells here now. As Meng Hao looked around, his heart throbbed with pain. He continued until he caught sight of a familiar location ahead. The glow of a restrictive spell glittered, and Meng Hao's heart calmed. It was the tomb of Qi Yunhai, the tomb of a paragon. Inside was no corpse, only a small bronze lamp long since extinguished. Outside of the tomb were layer after layer of restrictive spells. They filled the entire area with flickering light and would prevent any outsider from entering. Meng Hao landed just outside the restrictive spells and looked at Qi Yunhai's tomb silently. An indeterminable amount of time passed. Tears rolled down his face. After a long time, he kneeled down and gently knocked his head against the ground 3 times as he kowtowed to Qi Yunhai's tomb. And he looked up and murmured, "Thank you, sir. You're not really my father, but in that ancient illusion, you allowed me to feel the love of a father. You allowed me to be your son during that life." Finally, he stood up and turned around. He no longer felt melancholy, but rather, his face glowed with the unswerving determination of a cultivator. Meng Hao was now fully awakened from the dream. "Come on out," he said lightly. "You've been waiting for a while now. If you don't reveal yourself, then I'll just leave." As his voice echoed, a completely ordinary area not far off rippled and distorted. A woman appeared. She was incredibly beautiful with bright eyes and a way of moving that exuded feminine charm. It was none other than Xianxia. "I guessed that you would come here to offer your respects to Qi Yunhai," she said with a smile. "Waiting here saved me effort tracking you." Meng Hao didn't respond, but looked toward the area behind the 7th peak. Past the graveyard lay the area that boundless mists had once enveloped. Now, though, there was no mist. The 2 enormous statues were also gone. Only an enormous bright shield rose from the ground, emanating an imperceptible glow. This was a restrictive spell that covered a massive area. It might seem ordinary, but it was powerful enough to eradicate immortals. The area it protected was so important the restrictive spell remained fearsomely powerful. Throughout all the years, the primordial demon immortal plane had been open. No one had ever entered the area beyond. That was a forbidden area. No one was allowed to enter. Anyone who tried ended up dead. "Let's go," said Meng Hao coolly. As he moved forward, Xianxia smiled and sped into the air with him. As they shot forward, Xianxia felt proud of herself. Back in the 2nd plane, when they traveled this same path, she had been filled with incredible excitement. Now that they were in the 3rd plane, she was sure others shared her excitement. Thinking about this caused Xianxia to smile. She increased her speed, passing up Meng Hao. He watched her as she passed but didn't say anything. They moved at top speed until they reached the glowing restrictive spell shield. This was the same location where the statues and door of swords had stood. Xianxia's face was solemn. She took a deep breath as she pulled out her 3rd-class qualification command medallion from within her robe. She cautiously extended the command medallion until it touched the glowing shield. Suddenly, the shield flickered. Ripples spread, turning into waves that crossed the entire restrictive spell. A droning sound echoed in all directions. At the same time, a faint, low-pitched voice could be heard, filled with weakness and exhaustion. "3rd-class qualifications. Where do you intend to go?" The rumbling voice sounded weak, yet awe-inspiring. "The demon immortal cistern," Xianxia replied, taking in a deep breath. "According to the regulations, you may travel 30% of the paths in this place, and may stay for no more than 38 hours. The wording was exactly the same as before. Xixiang was nearly exploding with excitement as a wide fissure appeared in the shield. She took a deep breath and looked at Meng Hao with complacency. In accordance with his agreement with her, Meng Hao followed her into the fissure, his expression unchanged. Inwardly, he was on guard, unsure whether Xixiang's method would work. As soon as she reached the fissure, Xixiang passed through effortlessly. A beam of light from the restrictive spell shot toward Meng Hao. It instantly enveloped him, almost like a bubble, locking his feet in place. He was stuck inside the light, incapable of moving but able to speak. His eyes cold, he said, "Xixiang, what is the meaning of this?" Xixiang turned back, her expression one of shock and worry. "Impossible," she said. "You left a mark inside, plus I have third-class qualifications. I should be able to take an extra person inside, especially one who left a mark. Could it be that your mark was somehow erased?" Meng Hao's eyes glittered. At that moment the weak voice spoke again. "Paragon's qualifications. You may go anywhere you wish and stay inside indefinitely." As soon as the voice spoke, the bubble popped. His body returned to normal, and he walked forward through the restrictive spell as easily as if he were walking down a level path. Xixiang stared, her eyes wide with disbelief. She took a few steps back and looked blankly at Meng Hao. "This is impossible. We're in reality now, not the ancient illusion. In the ancient illusion, you had the identity of Qi Jiusi, but here in the third plane you're you. How could you be a paragon?" Meng Hao's expression was the same as ever, but inside, he was filled with great waves of shock and confusion. It was exactly as Xixiang said, and yet it was real. He was silent for a moment before slowly saying, "We were able to leave marks here. Apparently, leaving vestiges of an identity is that hard either. It's just something special that you can do in the second plane, right?" "But this is different," said Xixiang, her eyes wide. "The ancient illusion is night. It's illusory. The marks are like memories." Suddenly she gasped and looked at Meng Hao with a complicated expression. "I understand, it's night. Night remembers you." "Night?" asked Meng Hao, his eyes glittering. He'd long suspected Xixiang knew far more about the demon immortal sect than what she'd told him. "For example, night." Meng Hao thought back to when he had first entered the second plane. He had heard someone on one of the mountain peaks giving a sermon about the Tao. He had mentioned a true spirit whose name was Night. 1. The sermon which mentioned Night happened in chapter 567. Don't forget that Night apparently spoke during that same chapter. "It's not that I was trying to hide something from you," she said. "According to sect rules, we aren't allowed to divulge such information to outsiders. However, since Night remembers you, it doesn't matter if I tell you. In heaven and earth, there are true spirits. As to how many exactly there are, I'm not sure. I only know that they are very, very uncommon. In fact, there are only 10 or less. True spirits are completely unique in all heaven and earth. There is one whose name is Night. According to the legends, when it closes its eyes, the world is a dream. When it opens its eyes, the dream is shattered and everything returns to the void. Some destiny binds it to the demon immortal sect. Therefore, it took up residence within the sect and became its true demon guardian." Meng Hao was shaken inwardly. After a moment's hesitation, he asked, "Where is it?" "It is beneath our feet, within the lands of the first heaven. As for what it looks like, I don't know. All I know is that according to the stories that have been passed down from ancient times, true spirits are inauspicious. Some people have even said that the reason the demon immortal sect fell was because of it. When the sect was destroyed, no one could kill it, not even Lord Jai. Although, even if he had the power to do it, killing a true spirit is an extreme taboo. Therefore, Night has remained in the demon immortal sect all this time. Occasionally it reminisces, and that is the origin of the ancient illusion of the second plane." Great waves of shock roared through Meng Hao. He began to breathe heavily as he looked at Xixiang. "You're telling me that the ancient illusion we experienced was simply Night's dream." Chapter 601, Generous Xixiang. Xixiang looked at Meng Hao thoughtfully, then nodded. Suddenly, she thought of something else and hesitated. "It's all legend," she continued. "No one knows if it's true or not. Maybe it is, maybe it is. Furthermore, true spirit Night's bizarreness can appear at any time. In the original demon immortal sect, countless chosen disciples attempted to research it. In their belief, Night possessed an ability like teleportation. However, it teleported not through the physical realm but through time. Therefore, many people staunchly believed that Night's dream was no dream, but an actual teleportation through time. There was even much evidence collected to support that view." Meng Hao stood thoughtfully, then closed his eyes. A long time passed before he opened them. His expression revealed no change in thinking. "Whether it was an illusion or real doesn't matter," he murmured. "As long as I believe it's real and connected to me, karma exists in my heart. Regardless of the facts, that's the most important." He had felt confused, but after closing his eyes, he felt enlightened. "Let's go," he said coolly. "The demon immortal cistern awaits." Xianxia nodded at him. They walked in single file along the same path toward the demon immortal cistern. Before much time passed, they reached the location of the same cistern they had visited within the second plane. The area was damaged and worn, with cracks running everywhere and many parts fallen apart. Many stones had been crushed, with quite a few hovering in midair, making it difficult to approach the waters. The waters themselves were not as clear as in the second plane. Silt had accumulated in places. Most relevant of all, the waters were much shallower. At first glance, the cistern looked like a huge pit. Before it was full, now only about 10% of the second plane level remained at the bottom. When she saw that water, Xianxia's eyes filled with excitement, and she sighed with relief. What she'd feared most was arriving with qualifications, only to find the cistern waters gone due to time. Had that happened, she would have wasted all her effort. All preparations by her sect would have been for naught. Everything had been a gamble where success meant a meteoric rise for her sect. Failure and its losses would have meant decline. Xianxia suppressed her excitement as she looked around. When she caught sight of the rock where she had left her mark, she began to quiver and breathe heavily. Everything had worked out perfectly, even more smoothly than she'd imagined. The key to it all was the stone with her mark on it. To enter this area, one needed the qualifications. To enter the demon immortal cistern itself, one needed a second qualification. That second qualification could only be acquired within the second plane, but not used there. Instead, the qualification could be retrieved in the third plane and then cultivated. If there was no second plane and one went directly to the third plane, at first, there wouldn't seem to be much difference. Xianxia and her sect, however, had ascertained through augury that, due to time and the great catastrophe, the restrictive spells were sealed and would not approve of intruders. The only method of success was to get qualifications in ancient times. Xianxia took a deep breath, then turned toward Meng Hao, clasped hands and bowed. "Fellow Taoist Meng, many thanks for your assistance. I would like to ask once more for your help. Please remove the curse power and allow me to enter the cistern waters." She bowed again. Meng Hao understood that this was the extent of the help she needed. The area was broken and chaotic, and quite dangerous. Like at the bridge of immortal treading, she was nervous about invisible curses. The further one ventured, the more terrifying the curses became. Anything that touched them would receive intense backlash. "Let me try," he said with a nod. He had given Xianxia his promise and would not go back on his word unless something truly proved beyond his control. From his experience in the Bridge of Immortal Treading, he speculated why the curses didn't affect him. Perhaps it had to do with being a demon sealer. His eyes glittering, he walked forward, waving his right hand to lift the blocking stones into the air. The stones showed no curse. It took almost no effort to move them aside. Meng Hao continued forward, taking care of all the stones, even those floating in midair. Soon a path appeared, leading directly to the cistern waters. "Like that?" he asked, looking back at Xianxia. She gaped in astonishment, uncertain whether the curses existed. If there were no curses, then bringing Meng Hao was giving him good fortune for free. When this occurred to her, she felt distress. After all, she had promised Meng Hao he could immerse himself in the waters with her, and yet the water was quite low now. There couldn't possibly be no curses, could there? She thought. Don't tell me that if I got the proper qualifications and my identity was acknowledged, the curses wouldn't target me. With that, she ground her teeth and walked forward. However, before she could take 3 steps, her face flickered. The color of her skin turned black, blood sprayed from her mouth, and she retreated quickly. She fell back 4 or 5 steps and sat down cross-legged. She waved her right arm, causing 100 golden needles to stab into her body from various angles. Vast quantities of black blood oozed out, emanating a foul, rotten stench. Xianxia's face was as pale as death as she produced a small clay pellet. Enduring the loss, she crushed it, causing an amber-colored pill to fly out, which she consumed immediately. A long moment later, she still felt weak, but the black color was fading from her skin. When it finally disappeared and her injuries healed, she looked up fearfully at Meng Hao. Only 30 meters separated them, but to her, it was a shocking distance. She had neared a curse that hadn't fallen. If she had entered it fully, she would have transformed into black liquid. Having seen what happened to Jixiang, Meng Hao began to think. He felt bad. He quickly inspected the area but couldn't see anything strange about it. It was as if the area really was a forbidden zone, except the effects didn't apply to him at all. "What do we do now?" asked Jixiang. She was more than 30 meters away, her expression anxious, her eyes wide. Success seemed only a short distance away, yet that distance felt like an uncrossable chasm. In fact, she hadn't even noticed that her clothing had begun to rot. A wind blew past, causing some of it to transform into ash and reveal the skin beneath. Meng Hao was as uncertain as she was. He looked at the brackish water and then glanced back at Jixiang. "What if you hold on to me and I lead you in?" he asked. Jixiang was silent for a moment. What had happened left her completely shocked with no ideas what to do. Even asking Meng Hao to bring the water would have been useless. Acquiring the demon immortal body required meditating within the cistern itself. She clenched her teeth, and determination appeared in her eyes. The sect had made far too many preparations. All her sect's hopes rested on her. She would rather die than give up. She took a deep breath, then nodded with an expression of determination. She looked toward Meng Hao, clasped hands, and bowed again. "Many thanks for your assistance, elder brother Meng. Jixiang will remember your kindness for the rest of her life." Her bow revealed more skin to Meng Hao. He caught sight of a soul-stirring sight. Aware of this, Jixiang's face reddened. She straightened and coolly said, "It's just a little bit of skin. If you like it, elder brother Meng, I can offer it to you as a gift." Jixiang's generousness caused Meng Hao to cough a few times, and a strange look crossed his face. He calmed himself. Since meeting her, he'd sensed her changeable disposition. Every time he ran into her, it was like she had had a different personality. She was flirty at first, then licentious, sometimes candid, and now, almost like a man in the way she spoke. "No, forget about it," he replied, clearing his throat. He walked toward Jixiang, and as he neared, she grasped his arm. Then she took a deep breath, and determination filled her eyes. He glanced at her again, then, without another word, turned and led her forward 1 step, then 2 steps, 3 steps. Her body was trembling, and by the time they reached where her expression had changed last, she was very nervous. However, this time she sensed nothing, although her clothes were rapidly disappearing. By the time they had taken 7 or 8 steps, they were within the cursed area. Jixiang's clothes were gone, revealing a beautiful body that would cause any man to pant. It was curvaceous and beautiful beyond compare. Meng Hao glanced her over and saw everything. In his recollection, this was his second time seeing a woman's body. The first time was when he saw Chu Yuyan's. Now, the feeling he felt was completely different. As he compared them, he occasionally smiled and nodded, occasionally frowned, and occasionally wondered. Jixiang looked at him, clenched her teeth, and muttered, "What part do you like? I'll give it to you." Meng Hao smiled and pointed. Jixiang's eyebrows raised. She suddenly formed her right hand into the shape of a blade and shot toward the spot he'd indicated. Meng Hao's eyes went wide and he quickly stopped her. "Fine, you win. I don't need it even if you keep chopping." Jixiang glared at him but didn't say anything else. She held on as they proceeded toward the cistern. Soon, they entered the waters, moving toward the center. Although the waters were clearly brackish, something strange happened. A delicate fragrance emanated from Jixiang. As it spread, it fused with the waters, causing them to churn. In the blink of an eye, they became perfectly clear. They even began to emanate their own delicate fragrance. If you analyzed it carefully, you would realize the fragrance was the same as Jixiang's. This chapter was sponsored by Jusa. Chapter 602, Good Fortune. Meng Hao's eyes flickered as Jixiang dragged him into the waters and sat down cross-legged. There was not much water, only enough to reach Jixiang's supple waist. She pulled him to sit down cross-legged in the waters across from her. When his gaze fell onto her body, he cleared his throat. "While I absorb the power of the demon immortal cistern," she said lightly, "you can also temper your body. As it happens, I have a special type of physique. During the process of transforming my body into a demon immortal body, I will emit a unique fragrance. That fragrance can be considered something like a precious material when you fuse it into your fleshly body. Therefore, you can build up a lot of synergy with your best body tempering magics when you use them here. It would be much better for you to absorb the fragrance than simply let it go to waste. In addition, please do not disturb me during the process. As for the curses, according to the research of the sect, once I begin the transformation process, they won't affect me. If you finish before me, you can wait for me outside. I'm not sure how long the process will take, so I hope you can stand guard over me until I finish. With a final look at Meng Hao, she closed her eyes. The instant she did, a strong fragrance suddenly emanated from her. It fused into the waters, causing a white mist to rise up. The mist, too, was quite strong, and in the blink of an eye had covered the entire cistern, completely concealing both Meng Hao and Xianxia. Meng Hao's eyes flickered as he looked around. He quickly realized that the coldness, originally weak, had increased by more than 10 times after the mist rose. The coldness continued to increase. From his time in the second plane, Meng Hao knew that the more intense the coldness, the better the results. He took a deep breath as he rotated his cultivation base. A moment later, he realized something else. It seemed as if the mist in the area was adding nourishment to his fleshly body. As it poured into him, his fleshly body began to experience a shocking transformation, slowly becoming more powerful. Jixiang wasn't lying, he thought, his eyes shining with a bright light. Both the mist and the cistern waters were extremely beneficial to his fleshly body. He hadn't even employed any magical techniques, and yet was already receiving incredible gain. Although it didn't seem likely that he would be able to achieve a 7th anima fleshly body, while only in the 1st anima, it did seem possible to reach the 6th anima. According to his speculations, reaching the level of the 7th anima would be simply too difficult. I wonder if fleshly sanctification can be cultivated in this place. It can only be cultivated once, but when it is, it will cause a one-time increase in fleshly body power that is astonishing to the extreme. Furthermore, the atmosphere in this place is extremely well suited to fleshly body tempering. This truly seems the best time to use it. His eyes flickered with a bright light. After all, when it came to fleshly sanctification, the stronger one's body, the more power would result. Furthermore, Meng Hao had the feeling that regardless of whether it was a Taoist magic or a secret technique, since it had been acquired in the demon immortal sect, it needed to be cultivated here. Trying to do so in the outside world would be useless. Considering that, there was no reason to hesitate. Now was the time to use it. Beams of light were shooting out of Meng Hao's eyes as he closed them. Within his mind, he unleashed the secret art of fleshly sanctification. Rumble! Meng Hao's mind thundered as the secret art spread out. His body instantly began to shake, and the mist around him churned. An enormous vortex sprung up around Meng Hao, like clouds kicked into motion by the wind. The cistern waters also surged into a vast whirlpool. Jixiang was immersed in her own body transformation, but she could still sense what was happening on the outside, and was shocked. Her mind filled with a similar roaring, and her entire body began to emit vast quantities of demonic qi. As the demonic qi was unleashed, it caused the mist to grow thicker. Jixiang felt an indescribable sense of stimulation throughout her body because of the transformation she was about to experience. Time passed. Meng Hao forgot about everything, as did Jixiang. They sat cross-legged in the cistern waters, surrounded by mist. Nothing was clearly visible, not even their own bodies. They could only sense themselves growing more powerful. Meng Hao's fleshly body continued to grow larger. When it reached a pinnacle, it would then rapidly shrink back down. This continued to happen back and forth, creating a cycle. When each revolution of the cycle was completed, his fleshly body would exude terrifying fluctuations. His fleshly body continued to grow more and more powerful. Innumerable illusory magical symbols began to wink in and out around him. There were many, all of them apparently born from the void, pulsating with an ancient aura as they circulated around him. The entire scene made Meng Hao look completely strange and bizarre. In contrast to Meng Hao, Jixiang's body radiated pulses of demonic qi. They were incredibly dense, and as they condensed together, seemed to take the shape of numerous living creatures. These living creatures all had differing appearances, but each of them had existed for countless years. These greater demons of heaven and earth had all fallen by now, but they were still remembered by the heavens of the 9 mountains and seas. As they appeared, they shrank down in size, then sat cross-legged around Jixiang, performing incantations gestures that caused indistinct beams of light to shoot out and fuse into Jixiang's body. As for Meng Hao, he was sitting quite close to Jixiang. As a result, he was also located within the region of light cast by the greater demons of heaven and earth. Many of the indistinct beams also hit his body. Even as he trembled, the magical symbols swirled around him rapidly, then shot toward him and fused into his body. As the light and the magical symbols merged into him, Meng Hao's mind continued to shake. His aura grew stronger, and his fleshly body emanated terrifying fluctuations. Sometimes he would grow large and strong to a shocking degree, and sometimes he would shrink down into something completely unremarkable. His clothes had long since been shredded into pieces during the growth stages. As of this moment, he wore no clothes whatsoever, and like Xianxia, he sat there completely naked. The first thing to be strengthened was his skeletal system. It was a special kind of change that made the skeletal system incredibly tough and resilient, to the point where it could be considered something similar to a magical item. The constant nourishment pouring into his body made Meng Hao's bones increasingly terrifying. However, he was still very close to Xianxia. The illusory greater demon sitting cross-legged around her continued to emanate the indistinct light that was actually in direct opposition to the magical symbols surrounding Meng Hao. The light was not nourishing, but rather destructive. The essence of the demon immortal body was to stimulate potential by means of destruction, and thus mold out the most powerful fleshly body. The secret art of fleshly sanctification was based on nourishment. The stimulation of potential was accomplished by nourishing the body, making the strong stronger, until the ultimately powerful fleshly body was consolidated. They were two completely different methods that, from ancient times until modern, had never been simultaneously cultivated. It is not that no one wanted to try, but rather had no way to practice such cultivation. At the moment, though, Meng Hao, by lucky coincidence, had achieved a strange balance. The light from the illusory greater demons continued to destroy his skeletal system, causing his bones to be slowly shattered. However, that did not conform with fleshly sanctification. Therefore, the art that normally should only have required a few magical symbols suddenly began to pour out more magical symbol seals. They shot into Meng Hao to repair and perfect his skeletal system. This process of destruction and replenishment caused Meng Hao to feel indescribable pain. At the same time, the benefits he received were completely without precedent. It was hard to say how much time passed. However, because of the constant cycle, Meng Hao's skeletal system became thoroughly stable and firm. Roaring filled his fleshly body as he broke through into the power of the sixth anima. As of this moment, Meng Hao didn't even need a cultivation base. His body itself was shockingly powerful. He was not tall and thin like before, but rather thick and bulky, and looked almost like a small mountain. It was at this moment that the tempering of his fleshly body expanded out from his bones into his flesh and blood. Bones, blood, and flesh, veins, and arteries. All three of these areas experienced tempering. By combining them together, it led to explosive strength of the qi and blood. Meng Hao's entire person shook. The light from the greater demons of heaven and earth caused his whole body to wither to the extreme, until he seemed like nothing more than a bag of bones. But in the next breath, the incredible power from the magical symbols poured into him, causing his body to be completely restored. As the cycle continued, the magical symbols around Meng Hao began to lessen. Soon there weren't very many left. However, at the same time, an enormous fissure suddenly appeared in the sky above the 7 peaks of the demon immortal sect. As the fissure ripped open, an incredible booming sound could be heard that caused everything in the demon immortal sect to shake. All of the cultivators from the lands of South Heaven looked up, their expressions that of astonishment. Each of them could clearly see that within the fissure up above was something enormous. As it neared, they could see a gigantic, indescribably large pagoda. It was the demon immortal pagoda. All of them had seen the pagoda in the second plane, but this time there was something different about it. The pagoda was struggling to keep itself whole. There were some areas that were destroyed and collapsed. There were even some parts where the only thing holding it together was stretches of glowing light. The entire pagoda was in ruins. Apparently, it had been almost completely destroyed during the ancient war. However, the pagoda still continued to exist. As it neared, it let out a boundless, invisible pressure that caused everyone beneath to be shaken inwardly and wonder what was happening. As the demon immortal pagoda neared, suddenly, a great beam of light appeared from inside that was made up of magical symbols. The countless magical symbol seals turned into a river of stars that swept throughout the air, like a shocking bolt of unfurling white silk. It flew toward the 7th peak and the demon immortal cistern. It roared through the air, shooting toward the area which none of them could see, surrounding the demon immortal cistern, and then pouring into Meng Hao's body. Fleshly sanctification was a secret art that came from the demon immortal pagoda. The demon immortal body was a physical body created by Lord Li. As for which of the two was more powerful, it would be difficult to say clearly. At the moment, an unprecedented battle seemed to be taking place, with Meng Hao's body being the battlefield. The secret art versus the demon immortal body, the two fought back and forth. Would destruction win out over nourishment, or was nourishment incapable of being destroyed? It was like a paradox. This chapter was sponsored by Peter Den Brock, Jim Jeremiason, Kokol Kuginson, Nam Tran, Tyletter E01, Tyletter E34, Tyletter E15, Tyletter E15, Tyletter E34, Tyletter E1E, Tyletter E07, Tyletter E29, Tyletter E42, Tyletter E22, Tyletter E17, Tyletter E31, Tyletter E22, Tyletter E40, Tyletter E17, Tyletter E35, Tyletter E22, Tyletter E07, and Derek Yin Sao Chen. Meng Hao's flesh and blood expanded, then withered. The cyclical process gave birth to an indescribable pain that caused Meng Hao to tremble and sweat profusely. However, his eyes were filled with unprecedented staunchness. He clenched his jaw and persisted on. Refusing to lapse into unconsciousness, he immersed himself in the sensation. His fleshly body constantly withered and then expanded, giving rise to a terrifying power. Boom! The indistinct light from the greater demons of heaven and earth drained his body to the point of collapse and destruction. His hair fell out, and he looked like an oilless lamp, like a withered corpse. Boom! The secret art of fleshly sanctification and the magical symbols from the demon immortal pagoda swirled into his body, causing it to expand and grow until he looked like a giant. The paradoxical transformation was something that had never been seen from ancient times until modern times, an unprecedented molding of the fleshly body. As the cycle continued, Meng Hao continued to grow more and more powerful. Jixiang's body was also trembling. She did not have any secret art of fleshly sanctification. She only had the pure transformation of the demon immortal body. At the moment, her body was withered, but within the withering was shocking demonic qi. The two of them each practiced their own type of cultivation, constantly growing more powerful. As for the waters of the demon immortal cistern, they were slowly shrinking down. After some time passed, a rumbling sound echoed in all directions. Meng Hao suddenly raised his head, although his eyes were closed. Right now, his body was no longer expanding dramatically, nor was it withering to the point of death. Instead, he was tall and thin. He currently looked almost like he didn't have any power at all in his body. However, deep inside was hidden a fearsome and indescribable strength that far exceeded the previous limits of his fleshly body. He was now in possession of an extraordinary, enchanting power. Every single scrap of muscle was filled with shocking, explosive power. His bones were solid to an indescribable degree. As Meng Hao lifted his head, his entire body erupted with an intense aura. The wind whipped about as the vortex screamed. Shockingly, Meng Hao's aura had the fleshly body power of the seventh anima. However, he had not entered the seventh anima, but rather remained within the first anima. The mist around him seethed, and the vortex rotated around and around. In the middle of it all, Meng Hao inhaled deeply and took a moment to sense the power within him. Although his cultivation base was still the same as ever, his fleshly body power and his battle prowess were now completely different than before. His eyes glittered as he entered the second anima. Boom! Third anima, fourth anima. As he sat there cross-legged, it was without hesitation that he went all the way to the most powerful state in which he could exist, the seventh anima. His body shook as the same power as before surged through him, that of 64 great circle nascent souls. However, his fleshly body instantly reached an incredible, unprecedented state. His fleshly body, his skeletal system, his physical frame, were now thick and strong in a way that did not conform to any rules. He was far taller than before, to the point where even sitting cross-legged as he was still taller than previously. The fearsomeness of his physical body made him seem to be, not a cultivator, but something demonic. His facial features were vicious. Countless veins popped up all over his body, and his hair was even longer than before. When he looked up, his eyes radiated a ferocious will. It looked like a single punch could shatter the earth. Meng Hao wasn't sure exactly how to describe the current state of his fleshly body. He clenched his fists as the explosive, terrifying feeling of power exploded out from inside of him. He could tell that his current state of power far exceeded that from before. However, he thought, a fleshly body as powerful as this is still not spirit-severing. Although his fleshly body was terrifyingly powerful, he still had the feeling that for some reason he had reached a bottleneck. The appearance of the bottleneck did not cause him to be disheartened, but instead filled his eyes with excitement. He knew that the bottleneck could only be one thing. The bottleneck of acquiring a spirit-severing fleshly body. Once he broke through the bottleneck, he would have a complete spirit-severing fleshly body, and would truly be able to fight back against first severing cultivators. He would truly be within the spirit severing stage. Although his cultivation base would be different, his fleshly body would definitely have that terrifying power. I should be able to break through, he thought, his eyes glittering. After taking a deep breath, he closed his eyes. The greater demons of heaven and earth once again unleashed their indistinct light. One beam of light after another passed into Meng Hao's body. This time, they did not stir his skeletal system, nor wither his flesh and blood. Instead, they wreaked fatal havoc onto his qi and blood vessels. Meng Hao was Xianxia, who possessed a special physique and constitution. She could turn the fatal transformations into something not fatal, and thus acquire something like a rebirth in the form of the demon immortal body. However, Meng Hao had something even more special and shocking than Jixiang when it came to his physique. He had a secret art that was completely incompatible with the demon immortal body, and was even something like an enemy to it. That secret art was something that Qi Yunhai had described as being extremely rare in heaven and earth, with an origin veiled in mystery. Even as Meng Hao's blood and qi passageways were being destroyed, the inexhaustible supply of magical symbols around him poured into his body. In the blink of an eye, his blood and qi passageways were thoroughly restored. The cyclical paradox once again exploded out inside of his body. Meng Hao had gotten used to the destruction of his skeletal system and the rending of his flesh and blood. Therefore, this feeling was something he could handle. The only thing that happened was that he trembled a bit. His expression didn't change. Rumbling filled his entire body as his blood and qi passageways were destroyed and then restored and strengthened. He became stronger, causing his fleshly body to experience yet another meteoric rise. This rise grew stronger and more stable, transforming into an explosive power that could break through a bottleneck. Boom! His body trembled and blood oozed out of his mouth. The bottleneck was like an enormous battlement. As he bashed against it, cracks appeared, but it didn't collapse. One more time, he said, his eyes glittering. He focused all the power he could muster, combining it together. The magical symbols in the area were few, and as Meng Hao gathered his power, the demon immortal pagoda on the outside began to shake and erupt with even more magical symbols. The tower itself was beginning to grow dark and faded. The magical symbols joined together to form a silver river that shot toward Meng Hao, pouring into his body, causing it to shake. The light from the greater demons destroyed his blood and qi passageways. The secret art and the magical symbols poured into him to reforge them. He surged with more power, and then once again lashed out against the bottleneck. Boom! The bottleneck trembled violently, and the cracks spread out even thicker. Just when it seemed on the verge of collapsing, more light from the greater demons poured into Meng Hao, along with boundless magical symbols. Roaring filled Meng Hao's body. He lifted his head up and let out a soundless howl. As of this moment, his body was no longer expanding dramatically, but rather shrinking at high speed. He now seemed completely weak and thin. At the same time, the blood and qi vessels within him were completely restored. The light from the greater demons was incapable of any further destruction, and the increasingly scant numbers of magical symbols could offer no further assistance. His blood and qi vessels having been completely restored, the bottleneck within him directly shattered into pieces. As the bottleneck vanished, Meng Hao's fleshly body experienced an incredible, shocking rise. He grew more and more powerful to a world-shaking degree. However, what caused Meng Hao to frown was that, after breaking through the bottleneck, he didn't get any sensation that he was in a spirit-severing state. That caused him to feel a bit confused. However, even as he frowned, a completely unpredictable sensation suddenly rose up within him. Meng Hao suddenly noticed a transformation occurring that caused the sky to fade, the wind and clouds to seethe, the surrounding mist to shoot up into the air, and the vortex surrounding him to suddenly stop in place. The transformation was caused by the increase in the three aspects of his fleshly body: his skeletal system, his flesh and blood, and his veins and arteries. He had the special aspects of the demon immortal body, but also qi and blood of a fleshly body forged from fleshly sanctification. This was a never-before-seen combination that was essentially a paradox. It created a shocking transformation that had never been seen before Meng Hao, nor would ever be seen again. This transformation was not one of his fleshly body. Instead, it occurred within his Danshan region, next to his 7 nascent souls. Shockingly, a thick coagulation of qi and blood appeared, shaped like a person. Because his fleshly body had reached such an incredible pinnacle of power, he had formed a qi and blood nascent soul. When the nascent soul appeared, Meng Hao's cultivation base immediately began to emanate ripples. His hair whipped about, and his cultivation base exploded with power. In this instant, Meng Hao could sense the fluctuations of an eighth nascent soul. Spirit severing is within, the eighth anima, he thought, panting as he gained enlightenment. Meanwhile, an old man sped along beneath the seventh peak, nearing the forbidden area where Meng Hao and Jixiang were. The old man came to a stop and looked up, his eyes gleaming coldly. This man was none other than Patriarch Huyan. I can sense that little bastard Meng Hao inside there, he thought. He has my precious treasure. However, it belongs to the Heavenly Pursuit tribe, so even though he stole it away, he won't be able to use it. When I was in the second plane, I was able to acquire the information I sought regarding its secrets. He smiled coldly as he took a few steps back. Lifting his right hand, he quickly began to set up restrictive spells on the ground around him. Meng Hao, I'm going to bury you in this place. I'll wait here for you to come out, and when you do, I'll splatter your blood everywhere. Smiling coldly, he finished setting up the spells, then took a deep breath and sat down cross-legged. Not even of spirit severing, yet you dare to fight with me. In the third plane, the demon immortal sect seals all personal items. Your mastiff won't be able to appear, so you won't be able to fuse with it to borrow the power of spirit severing. Well then, you shall die. Intense killing intent appeared in Patriarch Huyan's eyes. I'll kill you, then I'll go back and wipe out that golden crow tribe of yours to join you in burial. Chapter 604, Like Splitting Bamboo. Meng Hao closed his eyes, then opened them again moments later. A strange glow could be seen within them as he looked over at Jixiang, who sat there pale-faced and trembling. It was clear that she had reached a critical juncture. Meng Hao looked away and then stood up. He walked out of the pond, through the mists, and to the outside world. As he left, the pressure bearing down on Jixiang increased. Earlier, the shapeless light of the greater demons had been shared between her and Meng Hao, but now all of it was focusing on her. Actually, she was incredibly lucky to have encountered Meng Hao. Without him there to share the burden, she might not have been able to handle it alone. Not only would she have failed to acquire the demon immortal body, but she would have faced grave danger to her life. That hadn't been part of her plan regarding Meng Hao. She could never have predicted that things would turn out the way they did. After all, she came from the demon immortal sect, which was started by people who escaped death all those years ago. Their understanding regarding the forbidden areas of the ancient demon immortal sect wasn't absolutely complete. When you added in the passage of time, and all the changes that had occurred, it was impossible to know everything. Meng Hao left the cistern waters and stood in the outside world. He was tall and slender, and his skin was no longer dark like it had been all those years ago. It was white and clear, causing him to look completely refined and cultured. His scholarly air was even more obvious and intense than ever. He slapped his bag of holding to produce a long green robe, which he quickly donned. Now, he looked absolutely different than before. He was even more handsome, more naturally graceful, more youthful. However, deep within his eyes flickered a dim ancientness. After a long moment, he closed his eyes and focused on his Danshan region and his eighth nascent soul. Qi and blood nascent soul. After a moment his eyes opened, and he slowly merged the 8 nascent souls together. This was just a test, but even still, his mind shook as if lightning were smashing about inside. An indescribably powerful cultivation base and a terrifyingly strong fleshly body appeared. Furthermore, his divine sense also increased, spreading out to cover the entire area. Said Meng Hao. The first thing he noticed was that deep within the forbidden zone was something emanated strange ripples. As soon as his divine sense touched the ripples, a backlash spread out that caused his divine sense to collapse. As for everywhere else, they were all areas that had been destroyed during the war. At the same time, Meng Hao's divine sense noticed a person outside of the forbidden zone. As soon as he caught sight of him, killing intent flickered in Meng Hao's eyes. Sitting there cross-legged and meditating was Patriarch Huyan, wearing a cold smile on his face. Laying in wait to ambush me, huh? Thought Meng Hao. His eyes glittered and a smile appeared on his face. The smile was one of ridicule and was filled with coldness and killing intent that was impossible to cover over. Killing intent still flickering, Meng Hao turned to look back at Jixiang. The area was safe, and Jixiang was in the midst of transmogrification. No one would be coming around to disturb her. Meng Hao swept the area with his divine sense one more time, then turned to head toward Patriarch Huyan. It was time to resolve the karma between the two of them. However, it was at this point that he suddenly paused in mid-stride and looked back into the depths of the forbidden zone. He had swept the place twice with divine sense, and it was in exactly the same location both times that his divine sense had collapsed apart. It made it impossible to even get some clues about what existed in that particular area. The only thing he could see was blurriness and what appeared to be a corpse. His eyes flickered, and he temporarily did not continue on toward his battle with Patriarch Huyan. Instead, he turned and headed deeper into the forbidden area. After all, he had promised Jixiang to stand guard over her. Therefore, he needed to ensure that the area really was safe. It didn't take too long before Meng Hao reached the place that had caused his divine sense to collapse. There was a boulder here, and beneath the boulder lay a corpse. Clearly, it was a woman. In her hands, the woman held a wooden sword. The sword emanated a faint glow, which was the source of the collapse of his divine sense. In fact, it might be less proper to say that it collapsed, but rather was consumed. As soon as Meng Hao laid eyes on the wooden sword, a tremor ran through him. It was not one of his spring and autumn tree wooden time swords, but rather one of those other swords, the ones he always found next to a corpse, an immortal murdering sword. Currently, he had 4 immortal murdering, and was now looking at a 5th. His eyes glittered. He stared at the corpse for a very long moment. However, it was decayed beyond recognition, making it impossible to tell who it belonged to. Meng Hao silently made a grasping motion with his right hand, causing the wooden sword to fly out to hover in front of him. He waved his sleeve to collect it up, then stamped his foot onto the ground, causing a deep pit to appear. After placing the woman's corpse inside and laying her to rest, Meng Hao clasped hands and bowed deeply toward the tomb. Then he turned, sending his divine sense out once more. This time, he didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. His body flashed as he transformed into a beam of light that shot out of the forbidden zone. Patriarch Huyan, the time has come to settle matters between us, he thought, his eyes flickering with killing intent as he shot forward at top speed. I'm going to use him to prove whether or not my 8th anima can exterminate the spirit severing stage. He shot through the air like a lightning bolt. Even in the 1st anima, his fleshly body was even more fearsome than it had been in the 7th anima. As he shot forward, the air collapsed, and roaring sounds filled with air. The roaring grew stronger until it seemed powerful enough to shake heaven and earth. When it reached the region outside of the forbidden zone, Patriarch Huyan heard it, and his eyes went wide. It was at this point that he saw Meng Hao appear. "Meng Hao," he said with a vicious smile. Without hesitation, he performed an incantation gesture and then pointed forward. Meng Hao's expression was the same as ever as he proceeded forward. He pierced directly into Patriarch Huyan's spell formation, instantly causing multiple black-colored figures to rise up and pounce toward him. Within each of these figures could be sensed a faint, shocking power. However, as they neared Meng Hao, his expression didn't change in the least bit. He continued forward, giving rise to an intense roaring. As soon as the figures touched him, the intense backlash from his fleshly body instantly destroyed them. Exploding figures surrounded him as he proceeded forward. The sight of it caused Patriarch Huyan's eyes to narrow slightly. He was shocked inwardly, but then recalled Meng Hao's identity in the 2nd plane and suddenly felt at ease. A cold smile appeared on his face. "You're stuck in my net now," he said. "I don't even need to attack. I can just watch while you slowly march to your death." "Oh, really?" replied Meng Hao coolly. As he moved forward, the area around him rumbled as countless illusory blades appeared. Their sharp tips whistled through the air as they slashed directly toward Meng Hao. Up in midair, countless bolts of lightning appeared. They looked like silver snakes as they lashed out toward him. As the rumbling booms filled the air, Meng Hao continued on without even pausing. As he walked forward, all of the restrictive spells within the spell formation collapsed as soon as they touched him, completely incapable of impeding his progress. This caused Patriarch Huyan's face to flicker. However, before he could do anything in response, Meng Hao's eyes flickered and his speed increased rapidly. He transformed into a beam of light that sped across the ground toward Patriarch Huyan. Booming sounds rose up into the sky. The restrictive spells and the spell formation seemed to be howling in anguish, as though a blade were slicing through them. They then exploded into pieces, and Meng Hao was standing in front of Patriarch Huyan. "I thought I was going to have to track you down," said Meng Hao. "I never imagined that you would come to me of your own volition. This battle is going to last for 8 finger attacks." With that, he lifted his hand and waved a finger. An illusory mountain appeared on Meng Hao's fingertip. Although this was only the power of a single finger, That power was like the might of a mountain. Boom! Patriarch Huyan's face fell. He waved his left hand to block, and when the attack slammed into him, he was sent flying backward, his face pale. Killing intent flickered in his eyes as he waved his right hand in front of him. Area. Second anima. Patriarch Huyan's area seemed to cause everything in the area to be confined as if with shackles. An intense pressure weighed down, and everything slowed. It almost felt as if everything were underwater. However, it was in that same instant that Meng Hao erupted with the power of the second anima. The increase in his cultivation base was secondary to the intense strength of his fleshly body, which was the most important part. Meng Hao broke through the confinement of the area. A crisp sound rang out like the shattering of a mirror as the area was completely defeated. This defeat was something Patriarch Huyan almost couldn't believe. He remembered that Meng Hao had been powerless to face up against his area before, but now it had simply shattered. One breath of time later, Meng Hao was directly in front of Patriarch Huyan. "Here, the second finger attack," he said. Backed by the power of the second anima, he waved his finger down. Patriarch Huyan's face flickered, and he performed an incantation with his right hand. Instantly, a black mist appeared on his body, which formed together into a black shield that he used to defend against Meng Hao's finger attack. A popping sound rang out as the shield collapsed. Meng Hao's finger landed directly onto Patriarch Huyan's chest. Patriarch Huyan's face filled with shock as he tumbled backward. His mind reeled, but deep down, he knew that this was not the time for contemplation. He began to perform another incantation, his hair whipping about. He lifted his head up and shouted, 7 emotions and 6 pleasures, 13 transmigrations Tao, 7 emotions, 7 Taos. Instantly, a prismatic beam of light shot out from his body up into midair. There, it split apart into 7 different streams of light like unfurling bolts of silk. They shot toward Meng Hao, radiating killing intent. If you looked closely, you would be able to see that within each of the 7 beams of light could be seen, shockingly, an evil spirit that looked almost like a nascent soul. Each of these figures resembled each other, almost as if they were related in some way. "Third anima," said Meng Hao coolly, shaking his head. Instantly, his cultivation base exploded up. However, the power of his fleshly body exceeded that of his cultivation base. It did not expand and grow like in the past. Instead, it sent out terrifying ripples of incomparable power. Meng Hao took another step forward. He watched the incoming 7 beams of light, allowing them to slam into his body. In that instant, a roaring sound exploded up into the sky. The 7 beams of light collapsed into pieces, and the evil spirits inside let out miserable shrieks as they were sent tumbling backward. With another step, Meng Hao once again appeared directly in front of Patriarch Huyan. "Third finger attack," he said, waving a finger. Patriarch Huyan's eyes went wide. He raised up both hands, causing a glowing shield to appear to resist Meng Hao. A boom could be heard as the shield exploded. Patriarch Huyan tumbled backward like a kite with its string cut, blood oozing out of his mouth. His face was filled with astonishment. What type of cultivation base do you have?" "The type that can kill you," responded Meng Hao calmly. He took another leisurely step forward. This chapter was sponsored by Boris Pico. Chapter 605, Momentum Like a Beam of Light. "Kill me? You overestimate yourself." Despite his words, Patriarch Huyan was actually inwardly shocked. His face was grimmer than ever as he retreated. Then his cultivation base exploded with full power as he prepared to unleash a divine ability. "Overestimate myself? Fine, I'll show you what it's like when I overestimate myself." His voice calm, Meng Hao said, "Fourth anima." A rumbling sound could be heard from his body as he entered the 4th anima. His cultivation base was that of 8 great circle nascent souls. As for his fleshly body, it had a terrifying power that exceeded that of his original 7th anima. As Meng Hao charged in attack, ghost images sprang up around him. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of Patriarch Huyan. He waved his right index finger, causing it to stab onto Patriarch Huyan's upraised right hand. His left hand reached out to push into Patriarch Huyan's chest. A boom could be heard. Patriarch Huyan fell backward head over heels, blood overflowing from his mouth. His expression was one of astonishment and complete disbelief. What he feared was not Meng Hao's cultivation base, but the power of his fleshly body. Such a frightening fleshly body was something that vastly exceeded his imagination, and was something he had never even heard of before. Even as the power of the finger attack caused Patriarch Huyan to tumble back, Meng Hao strode forward again. "Fifth anima." He now had a cultivation base equivalent to 16 great nascent souls, and an even more shockingly powerful fleshly body. He was surrounded by a rumbling roar, and although there were no physical changes to his appearance, distortions and ripples appeared in the air around him. This was a fleshly body that could cause anyone to be completely shocked. Combined with his cultivation base, it made it so that Meng Hao's steps could shatter the air. He appeared again in front of Patriarch Huyan, lifting his right hand up to make a fifth finger attack. Patriarch Huyan raised his head up and howled as a sense of grave crisis swept over him. He bit violently down onto his tongue, causing blood to spray out of his mouth and then transform into magical symbols that spread out in all directions. 7 emotions and 6 pleasures. 13 transmigrations Dao turns into 13 killing forms. Consolidate into emotion-severing extermination. The blood magical symbols in front of Patriarch Huyan shockingly began to form together into the shape of a heavenly saber. Instantly, it slashed down toward Meng Hao. In the following moment, Meng Hao's finger slammed into the blood-colored heavenly saber, and a huge boom rolled out. The blade shook for a moment and then exploded into countless pieces, completely destroyed. As for Meng Hao's finger, it continued to descend until it tapped onto Patriarch Huyan's chest. Blood sprayed from Patriarch Huyan's mouth, and his chest turned into a bloody mass. Roaring filled his body as he shot backward at top speed. His face was pale white as he gave up all thoughts of fighting and focused completely on fleeing as fast as possible. He was in absolute fear of Meng Hao's fleshly body. It turned into an intense dread as he realized that such a fleshly body was shocking to the extreme. His own divine abilities and magical techniques were incapable of even causing it to tremble. In the same instant that Patriarch Huyan decided to flee, Meng Hao's voice once again drifted through the air. 6th Anima. Boom! The instant Meng Hao entered the 6th Anima, his body trembled. He lifted up his head and roared. To him, Patriarch Huyan could be killed any time he wanted. What he desired to do was to test out the 8th Anima which he had created. As he entered the 6th Anima, the power of 32 great circle nascent souls counted for almost nothing. What was truly shocking was his fleshly body. In the 6th Anima, his power was now truly exploding out. As of this moment, a spirit-severing aura was gradually beginning to seep out of him. The air around him filled with distortions, and the soil in the area was jumping up and down. A vortex began to form, like a mad tempest. The mad tempest could do nothing to cause even a single of Meng Hao's hair to rise up, though. Within the tempest, he was the only thing that wasn't moving. As soon as Patriarch Huyan saw this, despite his cultivation base, his age, and his powers of concentration, he couldn't help but shout out in alarm. Fleshly body spirit severing. This is impossible. As far as he could remember, a spirit-severing fleshly body was a legendary stage that only existed in ancient times. It was both spirit-severing and not spirit-severing, because it did not have a domain. And yet, even without a domain, such a fleshly body could compare to the peak of anyone in the spirit-severing stage. Were he to also possess a spirit-severing cultivation base, then any other spirit-severing cultivator would surely view him to be nothing less than a nightmare. Body cultivation is not a focus in the current generation. Such a thing has long since become a thing of the past. Don't tell me that this guy acquired some type of body tempering good fortune in the demon immortal sect. Patriarch Huyan's scalp was numb, and he was scared out of his mind as he fled at top speed. He was already well aware that Meng Hao's magic had a 7th anima. As of this moment, Meng Hao's 6th anima was already shocking enough. If he changed to the 7th anima, Patriarch Huyan wasn't willing to risk his life and go all out here. He had more things to accomplish, so he ignored all matters of face and fled at top speed. However, no matter how fast he went, Meng Hao was faster. Boom! In the blink of an eye, Meng Hao appeared ahead of Patriarch Huyan. In addition to blocking his path, he lifted up his right hand and waved his finger again. "We're not finished here yet," he said. "What are you getting so anxious for?" Patriarch Huyan's face fell. Without hesitation, he performed a double-handed incantation, connecting the forefinger of each hand with the thumb of the other, with his palms facing away from each other. He immediately stretched his hands out toward Meng Hao. A four-sided collection of lines sprang into being, which was in accord with the domain he cultivated. A power of expulsion rose up, with one side being heaven and earth, the other side being a person, to be expelled. The four-sided lines flickered as they shot forward, shooting against the wind as they expanded out to surround Meng Hao. At the same time, A shockingly intense power of expulsion seemed to fill the four-sided lines. This power of expulsion was intense enough to crush Meng Hao into pieces. The bizarre voice seemed to come from nowhere and echoed out like thunder within Meng Hao's ears. The sound caused the shocking power of expulsion to seem to grow even stronger. This was not Meng Hao's first time to encounter this magical technique of Patriarch Huyan's. Currently, he was in the sixth anima and had terrifying fleshly body power. His eyes suddenly glittered. He opened his mouth and let out a roar toward the incoming four-sided lines. Screw off. The sound created something like waves that instantly suppressed all of the lightning up above. It rolled out, causing fissures to appear in the air, and rumbling sounds to be heard in all directions. The incoming four-sided line shape directly exploded into fragments. Its power of expulsion, having faced someone who it couldn't possibly shake, was now nothing more than a joke. It was like a tiny stream that wanted to become as powerful as a mountain. How could it possibly succeed? As the four-sided line shape collapsed, Meng Hao's finger once again tapped onto Patriarch Huyan's chest. A boom could be heard. Blood sprayed from Patriarch Huyan's mouth, and his chest caved in bloodily. Even his back was a bloody mess as he staggered backward. He looked at Meng Hao, his face twisted with savagery. "I feel like leaving," he growled. "You won't let me. Seems you actually think I'm scared of you." With that, Patriarch Huyan performed another incantation with his right hand. He pushed down onto his forehead, then opened his mouth to spit out a small, black-colored blade. As soon as the blade appeared, everything dimmed. It began to spin faster and faster in his palm, then grow rapidly in size. Shockingly, it transformed into a huge greatsword, upon which was carved the severed head of a dragon. Patriarch Huyan waved his right arm. His face was covered with a savage expression that seemed to say he was willing to go all out, even risk death, as he shot toward Meng Hao. Die, the power of Patriarch Huyan's cultivation base exploded out. In fact, the level of power he wielded now was multiple times greater than before. The area around him filled with ripples of ancientness that even seemed to contain natural law. Natural laws of the primordial demon immortal plane. These natural laws contained a power of expulsion that had nothing to do with the four-sided line shape. This was a true power of expulsion from the world of the primordial demon immortal plane. The blade descended, shocking heaven and earth. "You will fear me," said Meng Hao coolly as he entered, the seventh anima. The power of 64 great circle nascent souls exploded out within him. His fleshly body unleashed even more spirit-severing aura. Together, they caused the air around Meng Hao to begin to collapse. Roaring could be heard around him, almost as if this body of his was something that didn't belong in this broken demon immortal sect. It was as if there were invisible restrictions in this place, and any cultivation base or battle prowess that exceeded those limitations were not permitted at all. With the battle prowess he was now displaying, Meng Hao had already touched that world limitation. So, I don't actually need to enter the eighth anima, thought Meng Hao. I've already reached fleshly body spirit severing. As he took a moment to experience the sensation, he came to the realization that he was already in the spirit severing stage. Although he had no domain, he was still of spirit severing. In fact, he was even stronger than when he had borrowed the power of the Mastiff, put on the blood immortal mask, and used the power of the blood immortal. He faced up against Patriarch Huyan's descending blade, lifting his right hand without hesitation and pushing out with his finger. In this moment, everything suddenly seemed to freeze. The roaring sound that filled the air seemed to cease for a moment, and then everything returned. Crashing booms echoed out one after another into the silence. They filled the entire demon immortal sect, to be heard by each and every one of the cultivators from South Heaven. Patriarch Huyan coughed up blood and tumbled backward. The huge black-colored blade in his hand broke up into fragments. His face was pale, and ignoring any possible ramification that might give rise to expulsion, he employed the full power of his cultivation base to destroy his opponent. "You're already at your limit with your seventh anima," he said, his eyes filling with a streak of madness. "This is the strongest you can get." He was panting now, the killing intent in his eyes strong. "Since that's the case, let me escort you the rest of the way down your path." Patriarch Huyan lifted his right hand up and pushed it down onto his chest. When he lifted it up, a red glow appeared, seemingly pulled out from his body itself. It was a red-colored whip, completely illusory and capable of lashing the soul. It looked exactly the same as the whip Meng Hao had stolen earlier from Patriarch Huyan, except that its color was different. As soon as the whip appeared, Patriarch Huyan's fleshly body began to wither rapidly, as if all of his life force were being collected together in the whip. By now, his killing intent had reached a peak. Meng Hao stood motionlessly in the same place as before, the wind and dirt whipping around him, his hair flying about. In the space of a few breaths, the sand and wind around him dissipated. "Die!" howled Patriarch Huyan. His withered frame flickered, and a bizarre sound could be heard coming from the whip. It lashed down toward Meng Hao, filled with a bloodthirsty and terrifying aura. Meng Hao looked up. Not a tiny bit of sentiment could be seen in his eyes, only calmness as he observed the incoming soul whip and Patriarch Huyan, who emanated terrifying ripples. Meng Hao had tested out his new magical techniques. What he needed to do now was see exactly how powerful he was. Closing his eyes, he coolly said, "Eighth Anima." This chapter was sponsored by Sivajet Rahambaksh, Zen Fei Lo, Jacob Jurovsky, Sub Claudio, Hong Dang, Gary Kong, Abel Nunez, Marco Dupert, Elton Law. Chapter 606, Eighth Anima. As soon as Meng Hao spoke the words, a roaring filled his head. His body shook, and the air around him twisted and filled with fissures. Everything dimmed, and an invisible whirlpool instantly sprang up around him. As it rotated, it gave rise to an enormous hurricane. As soon as the illusory whip snapped onto the hurricane vortex, it whipped backward. Down beneath the vortex, all of the sand and dirt floated up into the air and began to sweep around. As for Patriarch Huyan, his face thoroughly fell, and he staggered out of control several paces backward. His eyes were filled with astonishment and shock, and his mind was reeling. Impossible, this magical technique has 7 animas, how could an 8th anima appear? Even as Patriarch Huyan reeled with shock, Meng Hao's body was seemingly filled with distortions. Intense, pulsing pain overwhelmed him. He had never imagined that the 8th anima would be so painful. His body felt as if it were being ripped apart. Wave after wave of power surged through him at indescribable speed, rapidly increasing in intensity. His 8 nascent souls were fully superimposed, and now burst forth with a power that vastly exceeded the terrifying cultivation base power of the 7th anima. In the 7th anima just now, Meng Hao had unleashed the power of 64 great circle nascent souls. That had been the previous limit, something that couldn't be exceeded. But now, even as the combination had just fused, that previous limitation was completely toppled. 65-66. In the blink of an eye, Meng Hao's body possessed the power of 70 boundless great circle nascent soul cultivation bases. That power continued to grow. The feeling of intense power as well as a terrifying aura spread out through Meng Hao. As his cultivation base and fleshly body continued to transform, the power exploded out. Everything around him was twisted and distorted. The wind and clouds were in fluctuation, and the hurricane that surrounded Meng Hao seemed to stretch from the ground up into the sky. Endless booms echoed out, exploding with incredible intensity. He trembled, and blood began to seep out of his eyes, nose, ears, and mouth. His visage was ferocious to the extreme, and his long hair whipped about madly. He could clearly sense his cultivation base climbing upward. In the blink of an eye, it had the power of 93 great circle nascent souls. And it was still climbing. Every level of power which was added caused booming sounds to fill him, and more pressure would weigh down on him. The energy which he could employ was even more shocking. At the same time, the wastage to his longevity increased rapidly. However, none of that could do anything to supersede the wildly intense rise he was experiencing. It gave him an incredible confidence, which caused him to lift his head up and roar. Aroar. The sound of it seemed to cause all of the pain that racked him to be diffused out into the demon immortal sect. As his body trembled, his cultivation base rose up from the previous level of 93 great circle nascent souls to 99. The color of Meng Hao's hair began to change. It was no longer black but now gray. His facial features were no longer that of a youth but rather ancient. His stature was tall and thin as before, but his aura was now completely different. 99-100. The full power of 100 great circle nascent souls cultivation bases exploded out within him. As Meng Hao roared, his hair grew longer and longer, soon reaching his lower back. The tempest around him grew in intensity, causing Meng Hao to slowly float up within the midst of the hurricane. Lightning and thunder fell down to circulate around him, causing the hurricane to turn into a lightning storm, shocking to heaven and earth. The sight of it caused Patriarch Huyan to pant rapidly. His eyes went wide and filled with a look of disbelief. His mind filled with roaring. How could this be? He. In the midst of Patriarch Huyan's astonishment, more roaring exploded out from Meng Hao as his cultivation base rose again. 101, 102, 103, all the way to 115. Meng Hao's hair now stretched to his knees as his shocking roar echoed about in all directions. The tempest around him continued to expand until it was 300 meters wide. It was at this point that the heavenly expulsion force suddenly appeared. The air around Meng Hao was continuously shattered. The fearsome aura surrounding him continued to rise up, almost as if some primordial wild beast was awakening. 116, 117. In the blink of an eye, the power of 128 Great Circle Nascent Soul cultivation bases exploded up. His roar was now the roar of spirit severing. His power was that of spirit severing. The aura around him was now an aura of spirit severing. The tempest was now nearly 1,000 meters wide. Lightning had transformed the area into a sea of electricity. His hair was longer and his frame taller. His gray hair floated about, and his visage was one of ancientness. His eyes suddenly focused, and within them seemed to circulate a power to exterminate life. As soon as Patriarch Huyan saw those eyes, his mind trembled, almost as if he had just been subjected to a powerful attack. His body began to shake, and he fell back several paces, blood spewing from his mouth. Within the astonishment on his face could now be seen a trace of dread. "You," he said hoarsely, his body shaking. "I'm not finished yet," said Meng Hao, whose eyes were still closed as he experienced the shocking cultivation base power of 128 Great Circle Nascent Souls. This power far exceeded the absolute pinnacle of the Nascent Soul stage. This was the power of spirit severing. It was a situation in which quantity changed into quality. With enough nascent soul cultivation base built up, he was able to leap into a realm that was previously only occupied by true spirit severing. However, even as Meng Hao had said, his eighth anima wasn't finished yet. Just now, his growth had been in cultivation base only. His fleshly body was still growing, rapidly flying toward a true spirit-severing fleshly body. Fleshly body spirit severing was a stage for ancient cultivators. In modern times, there were few people who could temper their body to the stage of spirit severing. In fact, you could say that it was virtually impossible, the difficulty level being just too high. For Meng Hao, it was only by a series of lucky coincidences that he could reach this legendary stage. As of this moment, his fleshly body appeared to be normal, but in actuality, every strand of muscle was being shredded. Every inch of bone was being crushed. Every vein and artery was collapsing. However, no matter how they were shredded, crushed, or collapsed, it didn't cause any problems for Meng Hao. In fact, all of that destruction caused his body to reform, making his qi and blood reach astonishing levels. Within the space of time of a few breaths, the thumping of a heartbeat could be heard, like thunder rattling out in all directions. It caused Patriarch Huyan to stop and look at Meng Hao. As of this moment, it appeared as if there were a shocking qi and blood fighting back against the natural law of heaven and earth. Qi and blood exploded up shockingly. As of this moment, every beat of Meng Hao's heart caused the tempest around him to pause, caused the air to vibrate, caused the land in the area to quake. Along with his qi and blood, his body broke through some invisible barrier. As he truly entered the spirit-severing stage, Meng Hao's spirit-severing aura exploded into the sky. He took a deep breath as he realized that his view of the world was now completely different. He could see innumerable dust motes dancing about in the air. He could hear countless sounds around him in the world, like the whisperings of innumerable deceased souls. He could feel all of the indescribable sorrow that filled the demon immortal sect. Most importantly, he could hear the sound of breathing. It was the breathing of something asleep, coming from deep, deep within the ground. It was faint, as if there were some enormous creature far beneath the surface of the earth, sleeping. Every breath it took echoed about. All of these things take quite a long time to describe. However, it was a very short period of time from the moment in which Meng Hao entered the eighth anima until he could sense everything. 128 Great Circle Nascent Souls pushed Meng Hao's cultivation base into a state which could be considered the world of spirit severing. Because of the endless good fortune that had tempered his fleshly body, now that he had entered the eighth anima, his body truly had reached the legendary fleshly sanctification. Figuratively speaking, that sanctification was none other than the spirit severing of his body. "I am not in the spirit severing stage," he murmured, "but I possess the power of spirit severing." His power now vastly exceeded that which he had experienced before when he had merged with the Mastiff. Now the time has come to have a little test. Let's see exactly how powerful I am. With that, his eyes began to glow with a cold light. He glanced at Patriarch Huyan, whose mind began to tremble. At that point, Meng Hao vanished. Patriarch Huyan's scalp numbed, and he was scared witless. He retreated rapidly, waving his arm to cause the whip to flail about in all directions. However, it was at this point that a reflection appeared in his pupils as Meng Hao appeared directly in front of him. Meng Hao's left hand lifted up, forming a claw that snatched a hold of the whip. The whip let out a whimpering sound but could not extricate itself. "You are too weak," said Meng Hao, his voice cool. He lifted his right hand up and tapped down lightly on Patriarch Huyan's forehead. Patriarch Huyan's body trembled as he was suddenly lifted up into the air and soared in the direction of the Forbidden Zone. Before he even began to fall to the ground, his head directly exploded. Blood and gore formed a haze that spread to his chest, and then his limbs, and finally his entire torso. All of that was accomplished by a mere tap from Meng Hao in his 8th anima. Patriarch Huyan was ripped into shreds before he could even scream, and his fleshly body was completely destroyed. His half-transparent nascent divinity fled out, a large hole visible on its forehead. Life force and aura trickled out of the hole, beyond its control. It was incredibly weak as it retreated backward. Its death was only a matter of time. Within the space of 10 breaths, it would certainly perish. It was with astonishment and indescribable fear and despair that the nascent divinity let out a miserable scream. Although it knew fleeing was useless, it still attempted to run away. However, it was in this moment that, from within the Forbidden Zone, what appeared to be a consummately beautiful jade-like hand suddenly reached out with incredible dexterity. The delicate hand stretched out through the air to grab a hold of Patriarch Huyan's nascent divinity. My cultivation base suffered damage. With this nascent divinity, I can concoct some pills to help with that. Do you mind? A woman walked out from within the Forbidden Zone. She had Jixiang's voice, but her appearance was nothing like the woman Meng Hao remembered from before. She was as pretty as a flower, bewitchingly charming, matchlessly beautiful, unrivaled in elegance and demeanor. She was the new demoness Xianxia.